Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Delicious things to eat.
The popcorn can't be beat. The sparkling drinks are just dandy. The chocolate bars and the candy. So let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
I'm a fan of classic movies.
Hello and welcome to Overlapping Dialogue, a podcast of double features dedicated to programming the finest, most eclectic, and downright bizarre film pairings and cataloging the discussions that ensue. We're your gruesome twosome, Kyle and Levi Huffman. I'm Kyle.
I'm Levi.
And here we are in the mid-80s of this podcast. You feeling old yet, Levi?
Oh, I thought you were talking about the movies we were talking about are in the mid-80s.
No.
I was going to say one of them is, but yeah.
We're getting on up there.
Getting a ways. It's been a while. Yeah, what is this? 80? What did you say it was? 86?
This is
85?
85 or 6.
I can't drive. 85. I mean, when that happened, what was that episode?
We're getting on up there where, what was 55?
Yeah, I wonder.
Let's go back in the old memory vault. It was The American Friend.
Oh, okay. Well, that was a big episode because we had Vim.
And we did. Yeah.
We had Vim, and then he came back briefly.
Until the end of the world,
until the end of the world, yeah, and he was busy, so you know, I mean, he did show a movie at Cannes this year. I guess
he's been busy.
Yeah, but so what number is this?
This is 87. This is 87.
Huh.
Can you believe that?
Yeah,
we're getting on up there. It is.
We've been doing it a while. I mean,
yeah. So this is like, I feel like since we've changed the format of the pod, this has felt like, well, duh, why haven't we done this episode yet? And I don't even know how long we've even formally talked about this being an episode, possibly.
Not that long.
Not that long, but it feels like such a, yeah, duh, we should be doing this. Velvet Goldmine from 1998, and I'm Not There from 2007, from the great Todd Haynes. Now, I feel like I can say this for Levi and I both. If we created like a Mount Rushmore of people we're fans of, both individually and collectively, kind of that we would put on a Mount Rushmore for this podcast spiritually, Todd Haynes would be one of those names I think that we would both agree on. Yeah. Robert Altman too. We haven't talked about Bobby in the past, or much recently. We have in the past.
We should do some of his movies at some point soon.
Yeah,
pick something out of there. I don't know, because he's got so much to pick from. I mean, dang. We finally went through, by the way, and watched all his 70s movies, because, you know, the last one we did was The Perfect Couple was our last Netflix DVD.
Mm-hmm.
And if you just really go back and look, I know we've talked about this before, and we don't want to talk about Robert Altman the whole time. We'll leave that for another time. But if you just look at that list of movies, it's bang, 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 like over and over. Just this, that.
Even the ones that have fallen through the cracks and are not like considered the iconic movies of the 70s are still so
Images.
good. Like, yeah.
Thieves Like Us. I really like Thieves Like Us. That's really good. Or even A Wedding.
Yeah,
is that really good?
Yeah.
Like, and then even something like Quintet, which is categorically bad, actually.
So bizarre, though.
Is so fascinating, though. It's like, wow, you really did this. Okay. And I know I'm a pretty big fan of Buffalo Bill in the Indians or Singles History Lesson. I like that. Maybe a little more than you do, but that is great. And you like Three Women a little more than me. I've been wanting to rewatch
really
that.
Yeah.
But and those aren't even all the stuff. You have MASH.
Which we've grown on a little bit over the years.
Yeah. Nashville. Brewster McCloud.
One of the weirdest movies out of all those. Yeah.
Just all kinds of stuff. I mean, yeah. Anyway.
But anyways, speaking of Robert Altman, Todd Haynes.
Yeah. I'm sure he's an Altman fan. I'd actually be interested to know where he stands on.
I feel like he would be, because like Altman, very different context.
Yeah.
He really experiments and does all kinds of different, kinds of movies. He obviously has affinity for like a certain style and aesthetics, but he's very much a chameleon in a different way than
Todd
I was.
Haynes talking about?
Yeah,
yes,
Todd Haynes.
He is, and I want to talk about that in a bit because I can say now before we get into the Blue Plate Special that it just came to me. Todd Haynes, I think, is another version of Wes Anderson, and let me say why, in the sense that not even stylistically or anything like that, but that I really been thinking about his first, 3 to 4 movies are wow, you had that to say. And not that there's been a big drop-off, but since then, it's been kind of after, and spoiler, even after rewatching I'm Not There, which is still really good to great, but you're saying, oh yeah, it kind of does feel like there's been a bit of a loss of a spark. And I mean, that kind of happens with anybody.
Well, we've agreed that Wes Anderson's kind of came back from that a little bit.
Yes, and I think that, and I'm not saying Todd Haynes is done. I mean,
Todd Haynes, you are on notice.
No. I'm just saying that with Velvet Underground, that was that. Oh wow, okay. Really Which that was at least a good excuse to make that movie because that was a documentary and it was different. Like Dark Waters, which was fine, pretty good. Or and then May December, which we really quite were not taken with. And even before that, Wonderstruck. It just seems like since Carol, I should say Carol,
I love Carol,
was really great. So I don't know. You know what I mean, though? It feels like, especially rewatching Velvet Goldmine, which we're going to talk about extensively here in a little bit, that just felt like, wow. And then thinking about Safe, Poison, even after that, Far From Heaven, those first few movies were just so strong that inevitably it's hard to live up to that, I think, eventually. Mm-hmm. And even I'm Not There is part of that too, I think. But
he did obviously some short films like the Karen Carpenter story Superstar.
Yeah.
The
Suicide. Go watch that movie if you want to be depressed.
I feel like in my head I thought there were more movies between Poison and Velvet Goldmine. There's really only Safe in the middle.
Yeah, no, that's it. Well, he made. Oh, you're gonna laugh when I say this. I think he was making Dottie Got Spanked around that time and. Mm-hmm. Some of those other, he was doing some other stuff, I think, briefly. And then, what always shocks me is how there isn't anything between I'm Not There and Carol. Yeah, because he made that Mildred Pierce TV show, which we haven't seen, we need to do. And then that Sondheim documentary he made, too. So, there was some time in there where he didn't really do anything. Well, I won't say that, but it didn't make movies.
Right.
But, anyway, that's just to say that I think this double feature is a good one, not only in the sense of what the movies are about, but also in thinking about what are his strengths and what can sometimes be his weaknesses, which are anybody else's strengths, probably.
Right.
But anyway,
Levi and I are still in the midst of celebrating the Dallas Cowboys choking in round 1 of the 2024 playoffs. It's one of those things, we're obviously Cowboy haters. We have people that we love in our lives who are Cowboy fans, so we're not trying to...
I actually know a random amount, and thankfully, most of those people are relatively sensible ones, I'd say. Of those few I'm thinking of, those are not that characteristic is not their primary engine of life, right, like a lot of Cowboys fans is. And so, yeah, that is good. But yeah, the playoffs have just started. It's wild card weekend. I was unable to see the first half of the Cleveland Browns and Houston Texans. Houston Rockets. Houston Texans game. Houston clobbered them. I was expecting now, and I'll say I picked Houston to win that game. I picked
you thought the Dolphins might beat the Chiefs. I
picked the Dolphins to beat the Chiefs. Both those things didn't happen. I did pick Dallas to beat Green Bay. Thank God that didn't happen, so I lost on that. And by the way, this is all just perfunctory, but I was just kind of picking these. And then the Detroit and Rams game, I actually did pick Detroit, and they won. So that's close game, 1-3.
As of the time we're recording this is Monday on MLK Day. Yeah. We have the Bills and Steelers play at 4 o'clock later today.
Yeah, and then the Eagles and Buccaneers at night. So it's been actually a lot of games.
Well, that was the whole point of adding a 7th seed is basically they get one more game.
Right.
Yeah.
That extra, because it used to just be there were 2 wild cards per division.
And the second seed got a bye, but not anymore.
But anyway, it's... I think been some good games. Well, I should say it seemed like that game last night was really good. I didn't watch it. The Detroit and Rams.
Close, yeah.
The other ones have been
actually more
or less blowouts.
Yeah. But again, it's Cowboy haters.
But well, that's what I was going to say. So everybody did pick Dallas for this first game, and we all expected, okay, this is the year where they can at least go the distance a little bit. Now they have been in the playoffs since this. But my prevailing memory of the Cowboys in the playoffs, interestingly, happens to also have been against the Green Bay Packers in what is known as the Dez Dropped It game, where they lost that.
Yep.
So they obviously consistently, and everybody knows this, and everybody thought this was the year,
right?
Well, even I thought, based on their performance, because I watched some of their games they play. I watched them play the Eagles. I watched them play Detroit. They almost lost that game.
They did get spanked by the 49ers, but that was early in the season.
Saw that. But so I watched them quite a bit throughout the year, and it did seem, I was kind of worried about that team a little bit.
Yeah.
And then you have yesterday. Now, it should be said, of course, that Green Bay got possession first, immediately scored a touchdown. They had the momentum from the beginning, as our dad said, and it was our dad's birthday yesterday, so happy birthday, Dad, because
he's the biggest Cowboy hater I know, so he was very, very
for his
happy.
70th birthday, he got that.
Yeah.
And we get that from him, and that's a characteristic
and he loves
I cherish.
the Raiders, as Levi does.
Yeah.
I do quite like the Raiders myself, but I think he likes the Cowboys either just below loving the Raiders, or hates the Cowboys just below loving the Raiders, maybe sometimes above that even.
Yeah. Well, and here,
historically,
yes,
Dallas
and also the fact
in.
that the Raiders, admittedly, always go 500 or very middling. There's no expectation with either him or me to see them there necessarily. There's always that little hope, and they snuck in back in 2015 was the last time they made it. They lost to Houston. That was when Derek Carr got injured, and that's why I hate Indianapolis Colts.
Injured in the last game of the season
for a lot of reasons. That was one. Then also the fact that they screwed Peyton Manning over after his injury, and the fact that they hired Jeff Saturday instead of that one coach they should have, and there was the whole controversy because it was an African-American coach that they wouldn't hire. I'm hoping that they do that with the Raiders coach that we have now.
Yeah, Antonio Pierce,
Antonio Pierce, but considering he's also black, I don't know. Maybe they'll be racist again. Who knows? But the point is that I hate Indianapolis Colts anyway. But there's always that you don't expect the Raiders to get there. So then the next best thing is, all right, let's go in the opposite direction. Who do we hate most? Mm-hmm. Now, we also need to mention that the Steelers are in the playoffs. They will probably be beaten today. If not, they'll be beaten next week by, I don't know, maybe.
Well, they play the Bills today, next week.
They play maybe Baltimore, or it would depend.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, they'll get beat. I mean, whoever. And the Eagles are playing tonight. And I picked them. I think they actually might win this game. Everybody's counting them out on that. I think Tampa is overrated.
Well, they're the NFC South team. Whichever NFC South team won the division this year and got in was probably going to get bounced.
And I know that Jalen Hurts isn't playing, and they've lost a lot. I think they lost 5 out of the last 6 games of the season. They had started as undefeated. They were the only undefeated team for most of the season, the Eagles.
I think Jalen Hurts is playing today.
Oh, he is?
He's injured, though. Like
It's questionable of his ability.
Yeah.
I still feel, though, that based on that, even still, they will have a better time of playing this game, and I think they're going to win it. But anyway, point is,
in honor of Todd Haynes, there's people also ask, when did Jalen Hurts come out? He's not gay, actually. I thought well, wait a minute, he's gay. Yeah. He came out. No, he's selected 53rd overall in the second round. So
I
thought that was funny.
Anyway, so that's all. Just say then you look for who do you want screwed over, and of course the first thing to look for is Dallas, and Dallas goes back and forth. Usually they make it, they'll win. They sometimes it's been them. The Eagles have won the division for the last few years, but they'll always sneak in on a wild card. They technically won the division this year, right? And the Eagles.
Yeah,
didn't.
Yeah. The Eagles had like kind of an early lead, and then they've choked away a lot of.
Yeah. Because they, of course. I'm sorry, because they were second seed versus 7th seed, in Jerry World in
I
Arlington.
think this is only the second or third season we've had the 7th seed added, and this is the first time 7th seed's ever won. Also,
yes. Well, also I think the first time that a 2nd seed has lost, or one of
the Green Bay Packers with 3 wins officially have more wins in AT&T Stadium than the Dallas Cowboys in the playoffs.
Really?
3-2.
Wow. Yeah, because they've... Well, and that's the thing is that they have been in the playoffs more than any other 2 teams in NFL history, which also means they've played each other an above-average amount.
Yep.
So,
historically in the 60s and 70s, all the way through the even 80s and 90s, they were playing a lot of games against each other
and also San Francisco playing Dallas. Because that was what we assumed, was that no matter what happened, San Francisco's going to get Dallas down the road, But anyway, point is, it was I guess what I can say, like always with the Dallas Cowboys, as they are called by Stephen A. Smith, an accident waiting to happen, the reality show, America's true reality show. One thing I will say, though, the way I would describe it is like what Billy Crudup said in Jackie. It was a spectacle from beginning to end. I mean,
talking about other disasters in Dallas.
Yes. And so I don't want to be the type of person in my life that is remembered for their hatred towards something, but it truly was an amazing experience to watch Dallas get shellacked like that and just get whipped senseless. I mean, it was just... It was bad.
I mean, it's interesting, like, since we've been alive... And we've paid attention to football. And again, I was born in '92, but I wasn't paying attention to when they were winning their last Super Bowls in the '90s. But really, ever since I paid attention to football, really from the mid 2000s onward, Dallas has disappointed in the playoffs. And Mike McCarthy, other than winning the 1 Super Bowl in Green Bay, has mostly also been a postseason disappointment. Yeah. So it should also be said that Jordan Love looked terrific, and Green Bay, they have had such luck with drafting quarterbacks, and obviously we're at the beginning of Jordan Love's career, so we don't know all the twists and turns it's going to make.
Right.
But obviously with Brett Favre, the stability he had in Green Bay, and then Aaron Rodgers.
And there was a question over, will Rodgers live up to that, and was able to, and then now this already coming out of that looks like another success.
Him and C.J. Stroud both for Houston. Now, Jordan Love is not a rookie, but this was his first season really starting, similar to the path that happened with Favre and with Rodgers.
Yeah.
But C.J. Stroud being a rookie, and if you actually looked at their numbers, I think it was CBS Sports or CBS NFL or whatever tweeted like Spider-Man meme, and it was like literally almost identical.
He actually
stats
had
in the games.
it above Favre slightly. I think he was just below Rodgers. That's not to discount Favre.
He didn't turn the ball over.
No,
both of them actually had picks.
Favre did. Well, Favre, and we've talked about this, but Favre liked to throw interceptions quite a bit too. Because it wasn't his last play as a Packer was an interception, right?
It was in
I believe
the NFC Championship game 2008 against the Giants, who would go on to beat the Patriots.
And so of that 2007 season,
third coldest game in NFL history, at least at the time. I know now we've already had some colder games,
right? But anyway, I'll just say that because I don't want to bury the lead here. Also, the fact that we are, and I'm not just saying this because I feel like I'm going to say this tomorrow when I go back to school and talk to the kids about this and go, oh yeah, we are pretty relative Green Bay fans.
They've
we
been
always
my
more
top
or less
5
have been.
More favorite teams in the league.
And that's partly because our people in our family are big Green Bay fans.
But me as a fan of the NFL and the history of the league, like when I think of the old school NFL teams, like the Packers or like
the Redskins, like
one of those like teams that are just way
Pittsburgh,
up there, or even the Raiders of a certain era.
Right.
Like I mean,
and the Cowboys are another one of those. So
and I've always the whole Green Bay franchise
Chicago
I've always
Bears
found
also
charming, mostly because like they're a publicly owned team. They're in a city that like. That's their biggest sports team by far. I mean, Wisconsin has other things going on as a state, but like as far
Green
as that
Bay,
city,
that's nothing against Green Bay as a city, but they're known for that.
Does not have a corporate name. It's Lambeau Field from Curly Lambeau. I mean, it's just the NFL purist in my heart loves everything
and even
about
in
the
sense of
franchise.
the name is it's something I didn't understand for a long time. The name literally refers to packing meat and cheese. Like it feels like a blue collar football team. It feels like a football team. Like they're going to go out and play football in the snow kind of team.
You know what was interesting last night? I've heard other allusions to this in the past that Michael Strahan said, who of course he played for the Giants.
Right.
He said after the game, and by the way, we saw the halftime show where Jimmy Johnson was like yelling at the TV screen, like getting all into like.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't even like a fake. I'm gonna give a little halftime. He threw his whole back into it. I'm surprised it didn't go out of place.
Yeah.
But Strahan said something after the game where he's like, to play in Dallas, you're more of an actor than you are a football player. Like you're performing for the cameras and the hype and the media machine more so than you are just being a football player. And he says that for the players, that has to have a psychological effect after a point,
and to that point, on the other side of that, Green Bay went there to play a football game, and they played a football game, and consistently. And what was so impressive about that too is, of course, Dallas came back and they shaved it off to about a 16-point difference.
Yeah, I mean, they got out. Green Bay got out to a big early lead, and
27,
especially in the playoffs, that's like a hard thing to maintain.
Right. So even despite that, you can't do that forever. But there was that question as we went into the third quarter, and we were feeling pretty good at the half on that. But of course, there was always, okay, let's just hang on, let's not get too excited. But I don't know. I was even getting that inkling after that first touchdown. I was like, well, that's good. Let's see how Dallas does. Really bad first few drives, terrible. Had a pick six, and then he had another interception that was basically almost a pick six, and then it turned into a touchdown. But they kept scoring, and even when they were coming back, it's like they always had an answer. They always scored again. It was Dallas, like a constant,
Dallas early on, when they were racking up a lot of wins, their defense was being touted as among the best in the league, and that was different because the last so many years they've had a more high-powered offense, and the defense has been lacking. So this was one of those years. The defense will carry them, and that didn't happen.
No, and there was a whole thing about Micah Parsons, who's really good on their defense, even though that. Skip Bayless called him a fraud today, and
just went off
whatever.
Off the deep
He's just a psychopath anyway. That he would then. That one funny thing, I said this while we were watching the game. It was pretty early on when it wasn't assured, yet.
Yeah.
And they said something like, that Micah Parsons complained he hasn't had any holding calls against him over so many years of playing over the whole season. And I kind of looked at you and Dad, and I said, yeah, because you want to play a football where you're looking for penalties against yourself. That's how you want to be as a football player. And that kind of sums up that whole game to me, is they were looking for outs every chance they could get, or this, that,
I know that there's been a little bit of controversy in the Detroit LA Rams game about some officiating calls.
Really?
None of that conversation whatsoever with the Dallas Green Bay.
Now,
game.
Admittedly, in that case, they were complaining there wasn't much that could be done as to that. In fact, if anything, there were far more penalties against Green Bay than there were against Dallas, as far as I remember. It was, and just above average. It was quite a bit more. I mean, they had that horse collar that was stupid. That wasn't even really a horse collar that they got an extra down on.
There's that. Well, it was dumb, but that Green Bay player had Dak tackle
on that face mask,
and that was on him. He should have done it, but they stopped him, and then that gave him.
But even with all that,
yeah,
which could have turned. I mean, we've seen that. People still talk about the Minnesota Miracle game with New Orleans and Minnesota, about how there were some calls against New Orleans that weren't. Well,
it was even
Minnesota.
worse the year before. I think when it was who was it? It was maybe the Saints and the Rams. I don't remember who it was. There were a lot of there was this really bad call against the Saints, I remember.
Yeah.
That
so,
that.
There have been versions of that, and people still talk about it. But even, and so those games turned on that in certain ways. Mm-hmm. This game didn't have anything like that. Even in those instances, they could not perform.
Yeah.
They just could not do it. And there's a lot of people getting blamed. Mike McCarthy's getting blamed. Dan Quinn's getting blamed. Both of whom should. Both train wrecks in their own way. Mike McCarthy, actually, I think more of than I do Dan Quinn. Dan Quinn's kind of a low-key train wreck.
The big thing about him is he was the defensive coordinator for those like Seattle Seahawks teams in the early 2010s, and so he still coasts on some
right.
of that.
Well,
like,
and then he
cachet,
screwed up.
like,
His biggest thing was the Atlanta Falcons Super Bowl 51 against New England, how they lost that game. But even and as a person who coaches myself, I can look at this and say, I think that coaching is important, but that's one of the things in the media that gets touted a lot as the main problem with a team is the coach did this, or the coach didn't do this, or they did blah, blah, blah. And I'm not saying that that isn't important. But it is, and one thing our dad said, which I agree with, is he doesn't hype the players up enough. He doesn't really have a personality that, like, breeds confidence like Jimmy Johnson did, for example, or, you know. And they've had a spate of really bad experiences with that. Jason Garrett was another version of that. But it's the players who can't do it, you know, in a certain sense. Now, I will say, they called some plays. We talked about this on both sides of the ball, as far as with both teams, that they were throwing these really deep passes on first and 10, and then running the ball and like barely getting downs. Mm-hmm. So that was something I think that fared worse for them than it did for Green Bay.
On Get Up, they had a stat for Green Bay that on first down, Green Bay averaged on offense 9 point so many yards per play, and that's like, you're not going to lose if you do that.
Yeah,
I mean,
well, and Aaron Jones was a monster
he had
yesterday.
A great game. Yeah.
Awesome, you know, like him and Pacheco won the. I'm sorry, I always have that name. Aiden Pacheco won the weekend running back wise.
Yeah.
I mean, just crazy numbers. I was watching that game Saturday night, the first half, and that was like, wow, they literally. And we can talk about that a little bit. I know you didn't see any of that one, I don't think, but
not really.
That was one of the coldest games ever, and I was thinking Miami would win that. More or less.
Again, that game, if that had happened earlier in the year where Miami's a little more healthy and it was on a neutralish / warmer field, I think Miami would have won. But, listen, I mean, it's easy to doubt. I feel like the Kansas City Chiefs now are in this position where they're like subtly moving along, and everybody, and there's the whole Taylor Swift element to the whole thing, we know. But, like, they could, like, you blink and they're in the Super Bowl again. I mean,
they could.
I mean,
as somebody who is down on them a lot, that's the case. But I will say, as a brief analysis of that game, part of the issue there was literally that people could not tackle each other. They were so stiff from the cold. That was also
that cold weather game.
And so they had these, and not that, you know, they weren't throwing balls and Kelsey was catching them and stuff, but they were running the ball a little more because their receivers are not as good as they used to be. Tyreek Hill now playing for Miami. They've lost him for 2 years, and that really has shown this year more than it did last year. But they just could not stop them from the run. They just couldn't tackle them, couldn't get them down. Same thing with but some blown coverage on receiver or catches, different things. And so that was the main problem with that performance. I think that depending on who they play this next week, it'll be a lot more of a fair contest. Obviously, a fair contest to where I think they'll falter based on that performance that I saw. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. But anyway, that's all just to say that a lot, going back to this, a lot gets blamed on coaches. But it's these players, I'm telling you. Dak Prescott is one of the most inaccurate. He's a lot like Tony Romo. It was the same thing. It's like sometimes they're on and sometimes they're off. It seems like when they're on, it's in like moments where they don't necessarily need to be, and then when it calls for it, they can't do it. And I'd thought with Dak that he was coming along where he might actually break out of that mold because he's been there for about 5-6 seasons now. It's been a while.
Something like that, 6, 7.
And back when Elliott was there, and they really and he really fell off big time after that first year. That I thought, he's finally coming around. He had some injuries, but this just goes to show again, he just couldn't do it. And a lot of people are going to blame that on CeeDee Lamb too, but that's all to say that it was a team effort of a loss, I think. There wasn't one particular
it was a total
thing.
loss.
It was just really bad.
But a total win for us. You know,
yeah, awesome. It's the kind of stuff you pray for.
We might have said this for Super Bowl predictions. I mean, the easy one everybody's jumping to are the Ravens and the 49ers.
I think that's probably it. But
and then after that, give me your Royal Rumble winner predictions.
I'll come to that in a second. I don't want to overhype this and
that's more important.
And overblow it. but Green Bay,
they're hot. They got nothing to lose. They're the 7th seed.
Yeah,
they're frisky.
I'm just saying, and that's my favorite team
Green Bay
in the playoffs.
49ers play this season? I don't remember if they did.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah,
now they may end up. Yeah, they're going to have to play San Francisco, so that will be tough. That will be a game. That'll be really interesting to see, because also San Francisco is really good, but Brock Purdy's really good, but he's still new, and he still has these little screw-ups here and there. He's had some injuries, different things. That's really why they were out of the playoffs last season, because of the injury he had.
So, yeah, that's guaranteed to be the divisional round game, I guess, now.
Because they're the lowest and they're the highest. But, yeah, that game will prove to be something to watch for sure, because that's one I was more sure about. 49ers will win, whatever, but they've been sitting, on the bench for a week, and
That's
so
not always good for teams, yeah.
And
especially
you could say the same for Baltimore too. I think they're far more the dominant team. Though.
Dallas has been great at home all season, and so for the Packers to go in and beat them in their home place, and now they're going to have to go to Levi Stadium.
As far as the AFC, I think Baltimore's more or less got it all sewn up. I feel pretty confident about
watch out
that.
for these Chiefs, though. I'm just saying,
you're right, but
because I think I might be wrong about this. It might be the Chiefs the Chiefs won. So I think if the Bills win, they got to go. Or no, if the Bills win, the Chiefs go to Buffalo.
That'd be nice.
I think.
Give them another cold game. That would wear them down.
I'm rooting. I like the Bills. Bills.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like the Chiefs, getting this win under the belt. We don't know what's going to happen in the Pittsburgh game. I've got a feeling that I think Buffalo still has some banged up players. They have played each other a lot in the playoffs.
Pittsburgh really
so far,
turned on
Mahomes
here at the end.
Has the advantage over Allen. All I'm saying is watch out for the Chiefs because. And I'm definitely not a person who thinks, the NFL's rigged, blah, 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 Could you imagine all the Super Bowl headlines that are going to be there if the Chiefs get back anyways, and then with the Taylor Swift...
They kick out whoever's doing the halftime show, and it's Taylor Swift.
Yeah.
I know that won't happen, but,
there would be a cameo appearance by her guaranteed if that happens,
definitely. Yeah, but so... I do feel, though, in the end that Baltimore's more assured... I am really excited and fascinated by this NFC race, though, because we haven't even talked about Detroit, and they are, really good.
They've been a little up and down, but I do feel like for that franchise and for that city and for those fans, which God bless them, they did exercise a serious demon. They had not won a playoff game in 22 years.
I think since the 90s, yeah.
I know, 32 years.
Yeah.
It was 91.
Yeah.
So that was a major moment for them. And I think now the team with the biggest drought of a playoff win, I think now is the Dolphins, because it was the Lions.
But because you've even had some of these newer teams like Houston and Jacksonville win over the past so many years.
Houston, since their existence, has now had more playoff wins than the Dallas Cowboys.
But, so, that triple threat of Detroit, Green Bay, and San Francisco is really dangerous right there. That's going to be something to watch, and either of those two teams are going to probably, I think, pretty sure be in the end of it. I don't know, about whoever wins this Eagles-Tampa game. Surely they're done for. Any of those teams they play, they play Detroit. That's going to be tough.
Yeah,
but anyway, we'll see how it goes.
Royal Rumble, who's winning?
It's between two
Giovanni
people.
Vici.
No, you know what's funny is I was having a conversation with somebody I won't name, a student of they're actually not my student, but I know them really well, and I coached them in soccer here the other day. We were talking about they're kind of sort of into wrestling, and they brought him up, and we're like, I kind of like him, and we're talking about him. But anyway, so to me, from the outside looking in, you'll have more of an actual idea about this. It really is a Cody Rhodes or CM Punk thing. I think it'll be CM Punk.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think Cody Rhodes can... Did he beat Shinsuke, by the way?
Yeah.
Okay. I think that Cody
That whole
Rhodes,
rivalry, which was mostly good, was kind of like fill in the blank until we get
Your
to
father
Royal.
was inbred.
Yeah, I mean, it did get us the American Nightmare Before Christmas,
right.
Moment.
But so that being done, I think it's going to be easier to generate a new storyline for him to go after Roman Reigns anyway.
Yeah, but what about The Rock? That throws this whole wrinkle in the whole thing because everybody's expecting there's going to be a Rock Roman WrestleMania match now. I've seen some people theorize, what if Randy Orton actually upsets Roman Reigns at the Royal Rumble, and then Cody faces his old-time friend and / rival Randy Orton because they had this whole history together, and that actually is at WrestleMania, and then you have a non-title match between The Rock and Roman Reigns is a theory that some people have had.
Yeah.
Then you set up CM Punk versus Seth Rollins.
And then that would be a good question of, can Roman Reigns actually deliver and perform not having the championship and actually wrestling?
That's the angle people have talked about.
And so but I think shot in the dark it's going to be CM Punk wins it, because I think that's going to fit more into the Seth Rollins that. I think that Cody Rhodes is still big enough to where he can basically generate anything he wants to generate.
The biggest face right now in the company by far.
And so with CM Punk coming back into it, I think they need that extra push and excuse to make him win that, to give him that juice to say, I can still do this, and then go to fight for the...
So you don't think R-Truth's got a shot?
No. I don't think Otis would either. I'm just going to say, I feel beautiful. He might feel beautiful, but he is not. Tozawa. Now,
that is nasty!
Who said that?
As Xavier Woods says when he does his little dances.
I do like Tozawa, I gotta say.
Yeah.
That's something.
I'm so excited, honestly, that this is going to be the first Royal Rumble I actually get to watch live.
This coming weekend?
No, the next.
Oh, right, okay.
But by the time this episode comes out...
Possibly the Zone of Interest weekend.
Maybe.
We don't know.
Yeah, we're hoping to have updates on that.
But anyway, we'll come back next week.
A lot of sports entertainment talk here at the beginning. But... You know what you're...
Got a very brief... You know what time it is. Put your hands up moment.
It's time for the Blue Plate Special.
Hi, Audrey. Norma, can I have a cup of coffee, please? Sure.
I'll have what she's having.
Okay, who wants the large pepperoni? Coming up!
Your Limp Biscuit with rotted honey is rainier. This should be a very brief one today.
You know,
we more or less already kind of had a Blue Plate
We've
special.
talked about this in the past. Like, being a cinephile in January is always a very interesting moment because it's a combination of those award favorites, which, by the way, Tilda still hasn't got back to us about her award for... Harry Dean from last time, but it's okay. We'll give you some more time, Tilda.
Or anyone else.
But specifically her, if she wants to be on the pod.
I wonder if Vim got mad because we didn't give him one for his can
He did
film.
have that new movie come out that I heard was good.
We didn't get to see it, so.
Oh, well.
He didn't send it to...
He didn't send us a
believe
screener
that?
after all the times
After everything we've done, he wouldn't send us that.
After how we've contributed to this comeback season that he's been in.
I mean, all I'm saying is that he wasn't making movies, and then he's on this podcast, and then he comes out with a movie.
No,
that's all I'm saying.
Yeah, well, next time he's on, we're going to have to grill him hardcore.
Oh,
on
yeah.
that. Anyways, January's always a tough month because we're like, it's a combination of trying to see those things that slip through the cracks in November, December, and then the new stuff that gets put out. Which
stuff that's just the January
which sometimes gets too bad of a rap. I mean, it's genre movies that don't have a broad enough appeal that they're going to get play in the summer or any other time of the year. So they just kind of dump them.
Which is funny because this movie could have easily been a summer movie.
It could have been. Night Swim.
But you know what's funny is what I will say
Which is what it is. Yeah.
Is that we, and I agreeably, we are, like I said, down on the January movies. But guess what? We went to see this movie and not Ferrari, which was a choice that we had, by the way. I want to make that clear. There was a choice between Night Swim and Ferrari. And without a shadow of a doubt, we're going night swim. That's what we're gonna do. We're not gonna do what you want us to do,
which is objectively crazy because it's like, oh, Michael Mann's got a new movie, but it's like it's a new Michael Mann movie in 2024, like
night swim.
It's 2023, I don't know.
But yeah, I know that two objects cannot occupy the same space.
And I love Adam Driver, but whatever. Night Swim, obviously from this year's supernatural horror movie. Was this This was a Blumhouse production.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't quite remember if it was.
It's Universal, I think, put it out. Right?
Yes. Its plot follows a suburban family who discovers that their backyard swimming pool is haunted. I love it's
sort of.
It's not even kind of frou-frou any more than that. It's just like, haunted swimming pool.
I want to say, first of all, before we get into this, that we saw this movie based on the trailer, primarily.
Yeah, it was like Marco Polo. And
Polo. Yeah. The thing is, trailers are a funny thing. Trailers are a very fickle thing. I don't believe in trailers most of the time.
You don't believe they exist?
No, I didn't say that. But, I don't believe in their capacity to inspire as much interest as people think they do. Because to me, I'm going to watch a trailer for a movie and go, okay, that just to see what it looks like, more or less. Mm-hmm. But, I'm already probably going to see the movie either way. There have been that handful of movies, though, where I have watched the trailer and gone, oh, I like to see that, like Sicario's one, Green Room's another. All right, moving on from 2015 to 2016.
Yeah.
This was one where I saw the trailer and was like, huh, interesting. It was very much, it felt a lot like a combination of a Grindhouse trailer from the 70s or 80s, but also a short film in itself.
Yes.
It was very... It was basically the scene from the movie. It didn't have all these trailer tropes. It was just this is the scene from the movie. And so that was so impressive to me. I was like, oh, and then Night Swim. It's almost like a punchline.
Yeah,
it's
right.
like Night Swim, and you've got to see it. So going in, saying all that, I had no idea why Russell was in this.
Yep.
So that was interesting. It's basically about this baseball player who hurt. He has basically MS, I think, or some version of that. I don't remember what it is. Does it say?
He's been forced to retire due to illness. That's
basically MS, or some deterioration of muscle or tissue or bone, and that he basically can't walk. And so they're like, oh, you need to do water therapy. Meanwhile, they're buying a new house. Well, guess what? Or they're trying to move somewhere. Well, guess what? He can, oh, look, you can do water therapy here. He does it once, and he's already
I'm like a new man. And
and it's because there's something in the water.
Mm-hmm. He's going to maybe make a comeback in baseball. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and it basically, do we just want to spoil what's going on here?
Ahead, yeah.
Okay, so basically, from what I could tell, there was some old Native American spirit. That's basically what I thought it was going to be in the beginning.
I haven't seen that trope in a while, I feel like.
No.
In a new
and it
movie.
Didn't say that explicitly, but it was basically there's this old ancient pre-Columbian, spirit in the water that cures certain people, but it has to have a blood sacrifice basically and has to kill somebody else to provide that. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of like Pennywise and It, where it only happens every so many years. And basically there's been all these people that have been killed over the years because of that. There used to be a hospital there that it happened or something. Yeah. And so basically that's what's happening to him, where it's oh, we're going to make you better, but someone has to pay. Yeah. And it's going to be one of his family members. Pretty average movie in general. I'll let you take the lead on this about kind of what you thought of it, though.
Pretty average January horror movie. I will say, I've talked about this in the past, I feel with horror movies. It's very fickle, sometimes with haunted house movies, and this is even more specific. It's the pool's haunted. And it goes back to, like you said, did it say that it was an aquifer, or it was some kind of...
Yeah, it was a natural spring.
Natural spring.
Kind of like the hot spring in Arkansas, kind of similar.
And there's part of it that's something's worth the pool. Let's just not go in the pool anymore. Yeah. In the movie. But with Wyatt Russell's condition, that opened the door for but he's getting a lot out of it. And there's also the whole subplot of him. he clearly loves his family, but he also still wants to play baseball, and that his son even finds like he made a little video of him like trying out and working out, and so he can maybe try to play again.
And they had a classic watching that on the TV, and then what are you doing appearing behind them? It's like it's so annoying in any movie.
So I mean, I thought the movie, like the world building was
only Jack Nicholson can pull that off in The Shining, but
was like surprisingly interesting, and I like that conflict. I've really been wanting Wyatt Russell to kind of be in more things for a while because he's terrific as the lead in Lodge 49, who's also kind of this former athlete who had an injury and he's working with pools. There's a weird, I don't know, there's a weird combination of that. That's not a horror story. But, so I've been waiting for him to kind of break out of that. I don't think this character on the page really did him many favors. Carrie Condon, I think, plays his wife, and she was pretty good. But yeah, I mean, on the whole, pretty average. I mean, I will say, like, any scene outside of the pool, I was not the least bit suspenseful. However, there was that surprising scene where Carrie Condon goes to visit the mother of a girl who died, and the mother's straight up like haunted now, basically, and like it's got like
the water is
black
in her.
water coming out of her.
She was possessed
like,
by the water demon, basically.
Which to say out loud, it's like, wait, what? This is what this is? Yes, this is what it is.
There was also a great moment when they were doing the Marco Polo scene, and it was doing all these reverse shots of like hazy, far away something, and then it cuts back to showing the character's face, and that like the water demon's up behind her. It's like that was funny.
It did give me slight Lady in the Water vibes, just purely from the premise, not necessarily the movie itself. But I was like, it reminded me of that, and even that, like, obviously, I think that's one of Shyamalan's worst movies, and I would actually like to rewatch it. But it at least like had. I did kind of compliment this movie just a little bit ago on like the world building enough and the conflict enough, but that movie did have a kind of a lore and a mythology to it that this movie really skirts by.
Yeah, it was just like, oh, by the way, there's this, and anyway,
and
like,
you know, pretty slapdash, but to an extent to which you're not really mad or resentful of the fact that you saw it. It's just like, okay. Yeah,
I also love the fact that like there were those parts where they like went way down in the pool and they looked up and there's like the pool edge, but it's like just sitting in darkness. Like that was a pretty inspired image. But yeah, I mean, it's just a really wacky, kind of weird movie.
That could have been wackier and weirder too. And like, actually, I hate to say this, I feel like it could have lost one kid. Like, two kids. It's like, you know, there was the whole thing about the one boy is shy and having trouble adjusting. Then the girl is meant there to be. The girl is literally there to be in the trailer and to have that scene of her and the guy in the pool. And but you know, there's like nothing there with that. So
there's like a random subplot of, oh, he's a Christian, her boyfriend. It's like, okay, just like, why is that? I don't know. As a Christian myself, I'm kind of like, all right, well, whatever. But Christians don't play baseball, clearly.
But I mean,
you know, another character I kind of liked was the real estate lady. She's like, oh yeah, I didn't want to mention it, but people have died here. It's like,
which is like happens in every haunted house movie.
Right?
Eventually.
It's like, like
I will say it is like haunted house movie, but the pool. It's like, okay, we've done that now. We don't got to do that again.
Right?
It's fine, you know. But you know it. Yeah. So fine. Okay. Not great. Not awful though either. It could border on the awful, but it
What did you
doesn't.
think of the section where, this is kind of a spoiler, where Wyatt Russell literally goes full ham and is like possessed and chasing his daughter around the house?
Yeah, that was like...
Because then you've got the stuff going on underwater at the same time.
Yes.
And I'm way more interested in that, of what's going to happen there. And then it cuts back to, zombified, weird, possessed Wyatt Russell.
The movie needs to put him through this journey of like, he's a nice family guy, but deep down he still wants to play baseball. But deep down he still wants to play.
Well, that's what I was going to say. He's very much a Jack Torrance figure there at the end.
But then he's like, he gets possessed. But then he has to make the decision. No, my family is more important.
I will make the sacrifice.
So I will be the sacrifice. And it's like, also, why aren't everybody in the community coming up to him like, coming up to that family like, what happened to your husband?
Right.
Like,
well, that's what I wanted at the end, because they literally said, oh, we're not going to move, and they filled in the pool, and it's like, And then you even got to think about random baseball historians years later.
Right.
Like, whatever happened to him? And it's like,
there's some weird stuff happening in the pool, and he disappeared.
It's like, what? Like, they probably just said something like, he drowned or something, and then they had like a mock funeral. I don't know.
But then people would be like, where's the body? And then
or they cremated. They probably cremated him or something. Or well, they didn't. But he cremated. That's what I was wondering too about the girl that died at the beginning. Is like, how did they just say she drank? Like, what happened there? The body literally disappears. So it's like,
I'm not saying you can't make horror movies in the modern world, but a lot of things years ago that could happen like that could be papered over and people just shrugging or whatever. Like,
well, it used to
the way things are now, that stuff cannot just
the
go
way that
unexplained.
America used to exist is you could literally disappear into it. Like, you literally could be anyone, anywhere. It didn't matter who you are or what you did or whatever. You could literally disappear into America itself. Yeah. And, like, now that's impossible. You literally can't do that anymore. Like, eventually you'll be found, like,
So I would say overall the rap on this movie is not good, but I didn't feel like my intelligence was being outright insulted. It was just a fine enough little horror movie you go to see. Yeah. And again, I'm a big proponent of, like, because there's a lot of people like, I'll wait till that hits at home, and then they never see it, period, because there's too many options now. I'm a big proponent of, we go to see those movies. It was just, the popcorn was good that night. I don't know what else to say.
And those types of comedies like The House and Rough Night and Game Night. I know. Yeah. Oh my God, I just said Game Night's a one-time only
Which
thing,
is crazy that those movies are more and more a product of the past in terms of just a studio comedy.
I just go see a movie, or even No Hard Feelings or whatever. It's like, I'm never probably going to watch those movies again.
And that's
there's
fine.
Certain ones of them I might.
You would agree that's fine, though.
Yeah, I'll remember certain things about them, and laugh and go, remember Deadeye and Joyride, like, or whatever. Mm-hmm. And that would even be one I would even rewatch before other ones necessarily, but, like, yeah. So this is its own version of that, too. It's like, yeah, okay, that was whatever. Like, one movie that I kind of thought was that at the time, but I've actually continued to think about was Barbarian, because that movie was just so weird and fascinating in so many ways. That would be one I would rewatch. But there's a lot of horror movies I've went to see. I'm like, yeah, whatever. Like,
or just like Beekeeper with Jason Statham. It's like, just kill them all, shoot them up, let
movie
God sort them out. Action movie.
Right. There was one movie I wanted to see at one point called The Rhythm Section. I don't know if you remember that. There's all these like random action movies I always wanted to see, and it's like, yep, I never saw that and never will. Like American Assassin, you remember that with Michael Keaton? It's like that was a movie I was like, oh yeah, gonna see that, and then never did. So now it disappeared. Yeah. It disappeared into America. There you go.
Much like Toby Keith's stance on his support of the Iraq War.
Never did.
Yeah. Speaking of things that are memorable though, that you don't forget, here is the trailer for 1998's Velvet Goldmine.
It doesn't really matter much what a man does with his life. What matters is the legend that grows up around him.
Brian Slade was the wildest rock star to come out of London.
The biggest thing since sliced Beatles.
But that wasn't enough.
We set out to change the world.
What happened? Who did it? And why?
Next week is the anniversary of the whole shooting incident.
One journalist is about to look into the mystery.
I was trying to contact you about a story.
From the moment Brian Slade stepped into our lives, nothing would ever be the same.
He was, in the end, like nothing he appeared.
Right after everything crashed, Brian seemed to get lost in the lie. Came someone else.
Miramax Films invites you to throw away your expectations and take a magical trip back to the 70s. When the glam scene rocked London, and the outrageous fashions, music, and behavior shocked the world.
I knew I should create a sensation.
Now, are you saying that the trailer is memorable or the movie is memorable? Because
the movie is memorable.
Yeah.
The trailer, I wanted to intentionally find a trailer that was like,
bad.
Here is this,
Yeah.
like, because this come out in 1998.
I mean, it is very much. It has Christian Bale in it, and it's literally the same voices. He fights for family and he lives for love. I know it sounds like Trump. He fights for family and he lives for love. Okay.
Yeah.
My favorite film is Velvet Goldmine. No way. But anyway,
Velvet Goldmine, of course, from Todd Haynes. Which again, like I said earlier, it's staggering me. This is only his third movie. Mm-hmm. And especially, like, you look at, like, Poison, that progression of, like, Poison, very small movie, but very audacious in a lot of ways. And then Safe is still, like, you can tell a little more, when I say put together, I mean, like, more, like, professional, more like something that's going to play at film festivals and maybe get released in a theater more so.
Mm-hmm.
And then this is just, like, way more, like, has a bigger budget, like, very clearly is going to garner way more attention just by purely what it is. But Levi, tell us a little bit about what Velvet Goldmine is and is all about.
So, Velvet Goldmine is a 1998 musical drama film written and directed by Todd Haynes from a story by Haynes and James Lyons, who was his kind of life partner. He died, I think, right before I'm Not There came out. I think of a HIV-related illness or something. I looked it up a while ago. Set in Britain during the glam rock days of the early 1970s and tells the story of fictional bisexual pop star Brian Slade, who faked his own death. Jumping down here, obviously it played at Cannes, was nominated for the Palme d'Or, won Best Artistic Contribution. But it uses nonlinear storytelling to achieve exposition while interweaving the vignettes of its various characters. Very much, and everybody compares it to this, it's the Citizen Kane of rock and roll movies.
Also queer glam rock,
right.
Specifically, yeah.
Yeah, obviously, mostly a David Bowie analog in certain ways. Also Brian Ferry of Roxy Music. Joe Braith, who was in... or he was just himself, I guess, but he was another one of those. I think he was the first openly gay rock musician on a major label, it says, yeah. And then Mark Bolan of T-Rex. Yeah, so that's the main thing as far as that. Basically, really, though, it follows the kind of main character of Christian Bale, is Arthur Stewart, who's this young Englishman at the time that all the glam rock is kind of erupting there in England. It did in America, too, but that was mostly an English kind of thing that just preceded the punk rock movement just after it. And that he basically participated in a lot of that and saw Brian Slade and Ewan McGregor's Kurt Wilde, who's basically an Iggy Pop kind of Lou Reed analog, especially Iggy Pop. And seeing that as this, and he is gay officially, and seeing that as this kind of, coming out for him and as a freedom to express himself through that music, which was big for the LGBT community in general of the time of glam rock, was just to be that outward about that. It's all about him years later also having to research a story about Brian Slade, who had basically tried to fake his own death, which failed, and then he basically disappeared after that because everybody was like, why would you do that? You're insane, whatever. And then he disappears. And so the whole movie's in 1984, him trying to go and find out what happened by talking to various people that he knew. And it's a whole, thing about his life and through that, and also in general about his, as in Brian Slade's life, and kind of what all that was, and who was he as a person. And it's interesting because it's kind of asking the same questions that I'm Not There is, but it doesn't do it in the same way, obviously. But that's the main gist. Where do you want to start with this movie? Because there's a lot of different places we could go, I think.
I think, we're going to get into an attempt later of adapting Bob Dylan.
Yeah.
And this, obviously, I think started out, as you said, I think earlier, as a way to kind of be about David Bowie.
Mm-hmm.
But I think one of the reasons the movie's so successful is that it like starts there, and as far as inspiration, but then goes into this kind of amalgamation of all that glam rock was. And I'm no glam rock historian. I like it a lot better than the punk that kind of came on the other end of it. But I think, to me, from the outside looking in, the reason the movie's so successful is that you think it's going to be about these musicians and the highs and the lows and the rise and the fall. But ultimately, the emotional heart of this movie rests with Christian Bale's character, which, going into the first time I saw it, and this was only the second time I'd seen it, I didn't know that was the end for the movie. And I think, the movie worked tremendously for me the first time. I quite liked it and loved it. But this time it was even more transformational to me. Especially because there are so many layers to peel back, and not even layers in the kind of, in some ways, superficial sense that I'm Not There is going to have that we talk about, but the emotional layers of Bale's character's conception of who he is in relation to this, and for how much of that he's on the outside looking in. He's removed from it. He's like, he wants to be a part of it, but he's always on the fringes. Two moments in this movie really emotionally got to me. And again, this is a movie that emotionally gets to you yet again in a way that I'm Not There isn't as interested in doing. I won't even say fails that. I don't think it really even cares all that much about being that way. But the scene, I think one of the also very underrated performance on this is Toni Collette, who plays Slade's ex-wife, basically. Where she's,
I don't remember her name. I've got it
here. Mandy Shade's her name. Or Mandy Slade, excuse me.
Mandy Shade.
Jonathan Rhys-Meyers plays Brian Slade. Where she's talking about how she was removed from, or how she kind of, the falling apart of her marriage with Brian, and how they went their separate ways, and how she saw him, I think, a few weeks or a month or so later at another show. I think at Ewan McGregor's character, Kurt Wild's show. I think it was. Was that what it was? I think.
Oh, you're talking about at the end,
And she says a line. I'm gonna butcher it exactly. I don't remember exactly what she says, but I'm paraphrasing. She says something along the lines of like, you never know how beautiful someone is until they're gone, or when you're apart and you see them from afar. And then it immediately cuts to when Christian Bale's leaving home and his mother's kind of like out there looking for him, and he sees her from the bus. That was a moment that, to me, I didn't even really register what like Haynes was going for the first time I saw it. But and I think David Bowie himself has even admitted to much as this, that for him, being queer was almost a fashion statement that he kind of went back years later.
That was the case with most of those glam rock stars.
It was a fashion statement. It was a way to be different. It was even a way to spit in the face of the heterosexual rockers of the 60s that they were kind of trying to move away from.
Right.
But for somebody like Christian Bale's character, it was, I'm going to lose my family to be who I am. It was very much saying, I am this person and I can only be this person, and you can either only love me or not love me, but this is who I am.
Right. Yeah.
And
that's a very different of a movie, because you can look at Brian Slade or Kurt Wilde or Toni Collette's character and them saying it's weird because it's like and not that they didn't, but they're like, we put it all on the line to do this. But it's like they're already, even despite whatever's going on in their lives, already kind of protected on that other side of stardom. Like they're already like, you're already made it, you're there. It doesn't matter what you do, you're famous. Whereas they act like, oh, we put it all on the line, and none of them remember him, and we can talk about that later, about how much to which these people remember that he was ever there, Christian Bale's character. But it's like they treat him with, oh, whatever, you know, we were this and we were that, and it's like, but he was the one, like you said, who put it all on the line and actually really lived the life they never really lived anyway.
And even towards the end when he sees Wild again, Wild's kind of bored with talking about it, thinking about it, like, and for so much of the movie, like, it's a weird thing. I think, Bale's character, which I keep mentioning, what's his
Arthur
Stewart.
Sorry.
Arthur
Edwards is the villain in the Hitman game. Sorry.
He's kind of like going through the motions and bored.
Yeah.
But then when we cut to like the younger version of him, he's on the periphery. You almost feel like he's always just wanting to look and get a up close glance, or maybe even have an interaction with one of these people. He's like very much this eager fan. And then we cut to this, like, which is obviously a very intentional choice by Haynes' part. The 80s in this is very ugly, very monochromatic, Orwellian. Like, it's
that talks about President Reynolds. Yeah, but it's like Reagan, obviously. Yeah, but
it's just all very like there's this loss of life and this death. Now, this movie does not make a big statement about AIDS in any meaningful way. But I have to think, obviously, Poison is a more
and
complicatedly interesting movie, when obviously those with that. But I do feel like there is this sapping of culture that a lot of the gay community, which of course Haynes is a part of, had to see with what 80s culture was. It was like taking a lot of the glitz and neon and glitter of the glam rock era / queerness and like boiling it down to aesthetics that in the real world was disappearing because of the death of this generation. Generations of gay and queer people.
Right. Then there was even that of, this is kind of a spoiler, but it turns out that Brian Slade is actually this other guy, what's his name? I'm trying to think. Tommy Stone, who is this very, like, white bread rock star that's very, like, pro-Reagan, and, like, that he basically became that, and that is ultimately just saying all he ever wanted in his own way was the fame, and it didn't really matter who he was.
And that animated somebody like Stewart, or Arthur's profession, like what he became and who he is. But even he himself is like bored by what the current state of rock and roll music is in the 80s by then, The second moment that really emotionally got to me, and I think this ultimately culminates in what Arthur's journey is when he finally tracks down and interviews Kurt Wilde, played by Ewan McGregor. And earlier, we had seen that, in the flashback sequences, that Arthur and Kurt actually had a sexual experience together, which clearly meant a great deal to Arthur, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a question over to what extent Kurt even remembers that. Obviously, he's somebody who partied and was on drugs, and so his memory is obviously in question. And that's another thing too. I love the unreliable narrators of this movie because they all have different aspects of Brian to interview or to say in their interviews, but like we don't. And what I love about this movie is, some people would probably see it as a problem, that we don't actually really know who the real quote Slade is. He's just this abstraction that other people attach meaning to, or in relation to.
It's kind of the inverse of I'm Not There, of like, let's really try and figure out this person
from the inside, and the inside has all these parts.
In this, it's the outside of saying it really was a bunch of nothing, but it's all of what it meant to these people is what matters about it. So.
And throughout the movie, kind of in the same way Rosebud is, obviously we mentioned Citizen Kane, kind of the MacGuffin of what does Rosebud mean. There's a sort of a MacGuffin that kind of occurs throughout this movie of this
literally alien jewelry given to Oscar Wilde then it says that Oscar Wilde was an alien, by the way.
The movie begins with like the alien arrival of Oscar Wilde, basically, and saying that he was like the root that all of the glam rock can be traced back to, which I think is a very interesting person to pick. I think Oscar Wilde, was he? Do we know for sure he was queer or gay? I know that there's been speculation about that over the years. But that like that irreverence that he had in his literature and obviously in his real life, everything that came from that tradition started with him.
Yeah.
And so...
Because there's that great moment where, I want to be a carpenter. I want to be a farmer. I want to be a pop idol.
Yeah. And how incomprehensible that had to have been in the 19th century to say that out loud, which of course is the absurdity.
Right, And the teacher's like, oh, you do you? Like, do you know what that means? Like...
So
before we say anything else, one of my favorite openings to any movie, even all the way through the opening credits, just like I remember when I was first watching that, I literally was like, "What the hell am I watching? What is this?" Like,
and then even past that, the opening is like quoting A Hard Day's Night,
right?
Which then, in its own way, shows back up, and I'm not there actually too, but and to that point, it made me think Haynes. I bet Haynes is not super into the Beatles. The combination of the way, in his own interest, I would presume, about what rock music are, cast a kind of a side eye at 60s rock and roll, combined with the Beatles are, and I don't even think this is a problem, treated as a semi-joke, and I'm not there, as far as their depiction in that movie. Mixed with, and the Velvet Underground documentary, which, of course, are not... Haynes' own perspectives exactly, but the amount of time that is given to Lou Reed's hatred and dislike or disinterest in what the Beatles were makes me think that Haynes himself was probably not, which I don't think is a problem, that's his own opinion, but I just found there's enough breadcrumbs for me to start wondering to what extent Haynes loves or likes the Beatles or what he thinks of the Beatles.
Right.
And so...
Well, he's also, it should be noted... and of course I'm going to talk about this, but when he was an adolescent and kind of growing up, obviously in the 70s he was real into that, the glam rock stuff, but then in the 80s became real into the whole no wave movement and Sonic Youth. He's a big Sonic Youth fan, and I mean Kim Gordon was in I'm Not There, and he actually got some of them to make some music for this movie a little bit, or to like cover songs of that for that. I think they got some people from Radiohead do that too. And so like he knows Sonic Youth and good friends with them and everything. But so like I know he was, and I've heard him talk about that before. About one time there's some story he was telling. When I was smoking pot outside my parents' house in L.A. listening to Sonic Youth, whatever. And I was just like, what? Like, but anyway, so he's also into a whole other era of music too that was honestly more influenced by that. The Iggy Pop, Velvet Underground stuff than like the Beatles were.
Right. No, again, I just
even Karen Carpenter being part of that too, as being this pseudo Marilyn Monroe-esque figure for that era of music, of people looking at Karen Carpenter and saying, "What's up with that? What was that whole thing?" And and so anyway,
and so this, especially like it looks like this emerald like.
Yeah, the Oscar Wilde thing. Yeah, it's like a pin,
or like amulet kind of thing, and it's passed between these characters. And of course, also that there was this character I wanted to mention just to some extent, Jack Ferry.
Yeah,
who was like,
because that's who it went to first after Oscar Wilde, I think.
That was like the person before the person. He was one of those people that Slade looked at, and Brian Slade, and tried to like pull that androgyny or that like cross-dressing, which was novel by the early to mid 60s, and like make it a little more mainstream by the time he's in his glam rock era. But then it's given to Slade, who then does he then give it to McGregor's character? I don't remember exactly what the timeline or progression is. And then wants to give it to Arthur, who we, by the audience, know that like, oh, this was given. This was
literally an alien life form
by Oscar Wilde, the alien, and it's gone between all these outsized, like supernatural, literally or figuratively, like people who are larger than life. And here's this journalist who has always been on the outside looking in, being offered this. And I feel like Haynes implicitly is, gifting Arthur's character with the knowledge that we implicitly as an audience have about what the progression of this traditional
it's almost
object
like
is.
This is random, but it's almost like the this you're literally gonna be like, what, like in Dune when the Bene Gesserit Reverend Mothers have this, when they become more of a Reverend Mother over the group, they do this ceremony where they literally drink this thing that gives them the collected memories of the entire tribe, and it's like that they're with, and so it's like this super sensory knowledge over, like, that's what's wrong with that girl that's his sister, is because she was in the womb when that happened to his mother, and so she has this, like, you know. But anyway, it's like a similar thing, like what you're saying, where it's like this collective experience through this object.
And I think, like most of us, Arthur's character or Bale's character is so just like, I can't accept this. This is too much. And he's like, essentially says something like, okay, well, suit yourself, and then leaves. And then you come to find out he actually put it in the beer bottle. The beer bottle that he about like chokes on it, and he realizes that's what it is.
And then he has to keep it, basically.
And I'm gonna try not to get emotional talking about this. And then he smiles. This is the only time that we have seen this character in this 80s section of the movie have any sense of happiness about who he is, and this like, I'm now in this tradition of person, and I am, now I'm now a part of these people. And as far as a depiction of fandom I've ever seen of anything, it really got to me this time watching it. In terms of just, like I said, this character who was on the outside looking in this whole time, and just felt like, how could I ever be in concert or one with these people? And here it is happening in this moment, which again, I'm sorry to get emotional about this, but was something that really hit me this time that was, just I didn't feel the first time watching it, which I think speaks to Haynes's talent as an emotional filmmaker. We can get caught up in the aesthetics of what this is all about. We can get caught up in, like, this is a one-to-one comparison to Bowie or to Roxy Music or to the Stooges or all these things,
or whatever,
and that instead this is Haynes in this kind of almost autobiographical, memoiric moment, situating himself in depicting this world, and I just found that to be incredibly emotionally satisfying as a viewer.
And another thing about that too that I think really works about that is that I get the sense that he doesn't expect, nor we are to expect, that Arthur's character is going to become anything. That the point is him saying that everyone can be that, or everyone can be that artist or that genius. They don't have to be famous, though, and that's not really the point of it. And I don't even know if that, to get into the weeds of this, I don't even know if that's what the aliens intended for Oscar Wilde to do with that gift or not. The point is that it's supposed to be this, what it calls in the opening narration, a great gift, which, whatever that means to whoever it is. But the point is, like you said, this inclusion into that, and like I said earlier, that he really lived the life they lived right along with him, or even more than they did, and actually was an authentic person.
But, we were talking about this just the other day, like, that moment made me start to wonder to what extent he actually did remember him.
Right.
And,
because, like you said, he wouldn't probably just give that away to anybody.
The experience didn't probably mean nearly what it did to, McGregor's character than it did to him.
Right.
But that he's still like, I still recognize you as one of us in some implicit way, and so I'm going to gift you with this. And again, I just found that to be incredibly emotionally satisfying. And something that, again, I think creeps up on me about this movie, because, again, I really liked it the first time, but, you know, Arthur's own journey in conjunction with theirs and kind of on the outside, and how that eventually wraps around to the conclusion. And again, that, like, finally he gets, like, even a moment, or certainly a object of joy that, again, we see is totally lacking from him in the 80s section of the movie, because he's just, like, walking around like a zombie.
Yeah.
It doesn't want to do this, like, brings
like
up...
I said, we joked it was like he was going to have to cover a Rolling Stones show, which, those who aren't aware, the Rolling Stones in the 80s were like what Zeppelin was by the late 70s. And I mean, and they were already that in the 70s too, but especially after that run of, like, you know, from, like, Beggar's Banquet through, like, Some Girls era of, like, Rolling Stones, which is, like, the best stuff. Like, that's all the great stuff, more or less. After that, it was kind of like, you know, Tattoo You and whatever, but it's just, like, very establishment rock by that point was the Rolling Stones. Like, the only thing that could have been another version of that was, like, the hair metal of the era, which didn't have that authority that the Rolling Stones did.
Cachet,
right. But so, like, he's clearly doesn't care, and I think that's actually another really good. And I am a fan of Bowie, the pop star of the 80s. I mean, we got Heroes out of that. Like, how could you not like that? Other than its use at the end of Jojo Rabbit. But
which is something I think will be very heavily studied and questioned as the years go by.
That movie I've been thinking about more recently really was... I don't even think it's an objectively bad movie. Like, I think it works fine enough. But just all the baggage around that movie has just proven to make it look even worse after the... But anyway, because there was that part where he's like, F off Hitler, and, like, kicks him out the window, and it's like...
And you can just see certain audience would be cheering that and being like, oh, no.
But anyway, what was I even talking about? Oh, yeah, that he's, like, just doesn't care about... Oh, well, that's what I was saying. So I even like the 80s Bowie as pop star Bowie. But, like, you can see that Tommy Stone as its own version of Haynes kind of pushing against that and saying, yeah, but you kind of became this. What's with that?
I think most people would argue that's happened to Elvis, the later stage. Anything that is once at one time was hot, was vibrant, was sexual, was different, gets kind of watered down over time.
And that's kind of what people were saying about Bob Dylan with his Electric era, which of course proved to be totally false, but that was an assumption that people were having, is that he was selling out, you know. And interestingly, the Beatles never did that. They almost did the opposite. They almost went from being, the pop bubblegum music to, like, we're not going to tour and we're going to record music, which is, by the way, still going to be some of the highest selling music of all time, and we didn't even tour it. Like, that's how big and different they were.
And then they, when they were, arguably, they stopped at their height when they were still the biggest act in the world, which...
And don't you find, this is kind of a one-off thing, but I feel like somebody should write something about this. Don't you find it really kind of tragic that the last true Beatles concert was at Candlestick Park, which doesn't even exist anymore?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, we can't.
I remember that was something that people brought up when they tore it down in Levi's Stadium, and people said,
I know it's all my fault. I know,
that, like, people were like, well, why can't we just enhance what we have? Why does it have to be this new?
And I know it sounds stupid to say, why would we save an entire stadium just because the Beatles played there? But it's like, I don't know. It's like, you know what? It sounds kind of silly, but it's like...
This might also sound silly, but there are whole structures throughout Europe that have been preserved over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And some people might think this is silly, but, like, where the Beatles played in American culture,
and
for I know I'm going to get in trouble like John Lennon did, but, like, that is akin to what American religion, and we can take issue with what that is, but that is akin to what American religion is those pop cultural
and that wasn't even American
spaces,
it was Britain, but and I know they did that whole rooftop concert, whatever, but, like, that was the beat. That was it. That was the Beatles. Was that? And like I said, that really only dawned on me now that, like, we can't even go to where that happened. You know what I mean? I mean, yeah, you can go to Levi's Stadium or whatever. You can go to they stood in this spot, I guess, but like
people take pictures at Abbey Road walking across the street.
But it's like we can't go like. I feel like I know this. A lot of people are probably hearing this and being like, "Why do you even care about that?" But it's like we can't even go to where that happened. Like that just feels very tragic to me. But anyway,
but this, you know, I feel like by the end of the movie, like his character is making peace with the fact that this is over.
Yeah,
and that we're moving on from this. And again, part of it is a personal satisfaction thing. I think for him, he's like, and I also thought too. We didn't really mention this. I feel like it's a subtext going on of like when he's told to go cover this or write this story, he's like, why do you want me to do it? Almost like implying that he knows that they're thinking, oh, you're the gay one. You know all that
You're the
stuff.
gay British man, yeah.
And they don't say that out loud. But that is, I think also he's having to relive that identity and what all that meant to him. And while there was a lot of good stuff that came out of it, there's also the painful memories that come from it. And he's implicitly battling against that as he's going through, you know, this whole experience of covering this and kind of regurgitating and recontextualizing it for the 80s.
Well, and that's another thing inherent in that, too, is that, like you said, him being beaten down by that. I mean, he looks like, I mean, yeah, he wears like a leather jacket and he's like, you know, he's Christian Bale. I mean, he looks like he's a cool guy, you know. But you look at him then, and then you look at what he looked like when he was a younger person. By the way, really successful young to old transition. That's something like actually looks really good.
The same person.
Yeah, because that's something that is so tough to pull off. But I didn't doubt at any moment in the movie.
And a lot of it's just subtle costume.
Yeah, it ain't even that
body language that obviously he's giving.
Right, it ain't even that. You know, much to do, but it's just that was really impressive to me. I didn't even think about it until now. I was thinking about it, but he looks like an establishment person by then, and that him being given that jewelry again is to go back to that is almost like Kurt Wilde saying, even while we're like in the Judean captivity or whatever you want to call it, in a version of that, even though we're, oppressed, we can still keep that version of us inside of us, even if and they can't break that, like, know. And kind of so that, I think, is another kind of implicit meaning of that, is even in the 80s of, like, we can still be who we are anyway.
But like you said, the 80s depicting this is a lot more Orwellian.
Yeah.
There's aspects of it that remind me of Brazil. Like,
there's literally parts of, like, where there's literally a shot where he's like, yeah, we can't do this anymore, goodbye, hangs up the phone, and there's, like, two suits, like, sitting there staring at him like, yeah. And it's like there's a literal conspiracy going on. Mm-hmm. Like, that's like a random, like, all the way to the side of the movie, oh, by the way, there's a government conspiracy happening here. And it's like, and what's so funny is he's not even interested in that. Like, Haynes doesn't even care. He's like, oh, yeah, by the way, this is going on, but whatever, don't worry about that. And it's just like, what? Like, but, so...
I think I think to a large extent there is a subtext that can't be forgotten about Haynes depicting in the 90s a look back of the 80s, looking back at the 70s. There's kind of a Russian nesting doll structure to this that, again, I think is mourning the loss of when queer was the most mainstream. And now it is in another way, I guess, but like...
When it was new, though.
When it was new and when it was novel, when it felt so full of life, and how that eventually was commodified and that was eventually stripped.
Well, interestingly, too, how, like, I know a random amount about this for a band I don't even really like, of the Sex Pistols. Like, the Sex Pistols kind of came out of and British punk rock came out of that, like, I don't know if you ever knew about this. There were those, like, stores literally called Sex.
Yeah,
those like stores in England that were these very like kind of started in that. Now I'm not a fashion like historian or even a punk rock historian exactly, but from what I understood, kind of were part of and participated in that glam rock style, which then slowly eased out and became punk rock, and kind of a lot of those bands came out of that scene of those stores. Like, for example, you probably don't even know this. I watched this in that one show they made. called Pistol that was about the Sex Pistols that Danny Boyle did for Hulu, which actually was an alright show. I didn't ever finish it, but randomly the main, I can't remember her name now, the main woman in the Pretenders actually worked at one of those and was good friends with the Sex Pistols, and she was like Canadian, but she worked in England. What's her name?
Christy Hine?
Yeah, Christy Hine.
Chrissy Hine.
That she was like part of that whole world and kind of worked in some of those places and kind of was at the beginning of that whole movement in its own way. But so that that even glam rock got, like I said, not commodified into punk, because punk was its own version of not wanting to be commodified. But even as a person who is a relative punk rock fan, immediately was commodified into its own thing and was kind of a farce and a clown show in its own way, as far as like what it's actual. Because that's the funny thing to me. What was interesting to me is that with punk rock, to talk about that briefly, I never really cared about what the politics, never did, about what the politics or the social aspects of that were. I actually liked the music, which sounds weird because everybody at the time, it's like there's that part in 20th Century Women, which I think a great scene where they play Black Flag, and I really love that album too, by the way. But the Nervous Breakdown EP, and they're going to write a lo-fi EP. And then they put on Talking Heads instead. But before that, she's nodding. She's like, they know they're not good, so I get that. But like, what's the deal?
Well, she's trying like, at least, right? To like,
but to me, I'm like, I never want, like, I know that was a whole thing about punk rock that they're like, we're not good and we don't care. But to me, that style became so influential that when you go back now, in my opinion, it goes back to just kind of being good. In my opinion, like, I know a lot of people listen to that and go, this sounds like trash, or I don't like them screaming or whatever. But to me, it's like, I think that became a part of punk rock that people just, the substance of it was actually the sound and not what was being said, to the point where what was being said was actually what was empty all along, and it was more about
to that point, some of
it,
the aesthetics of this era of glam rock. It was more about, we can do this, not how does this reflect the music. I mean, like and that happens with every era of music, and so much of fashion and of culture comes from music. It's an accessory to the music. It's not the music itself. And I feel like that's a statement being made in this movie about that those two things operated at the same time, but were always not necessarily in concert with each other.
Right.
Figuratively,
Yeah, and so that, like I say, that's all I'll say with punk rock. To me, it's more about the feeling and the power of the music rather than what it meant. Like, it didn't mean anything. And that's honestly, I think that's what it probably started as, was I want to, and that's kind of what punk rock has always been, is I want to I want to feel this way, and I want other people to feel this way. But then it becomes all about this, like, right wing, left wing, like, because that's the funny thing about punk rock, is it's so randomly divergent, split on either the right or the left. To the point where I don't think it can be identified as either. And
it don't even operate in a traditional American political structure.
Right, and then because it started kind of British and then it became American, and
but it's almost a rejection of traditional political ideas anyway.
Right. Well, and it's also a rejection of the counterculture's more positive outlook by saying, no, we're going to be angry and mean, and we like that, and that's what, But anyway, stop talking about punk rock. To get back to this movie, I mean, we've covered a lot of it, but I think one thing I kind of wanted to say is, we'll talk about his multi-hyphenate style first real quick, because this will go into that. Haven't you thought it's interesting, because I've thought about this the last few movies of his I've really watched, paid attention to, how much he's interested and fascinated by the news magazine style of journalism. Meaning that, like, there's parts in this movie where it's like late night or like evening TV covering this stuff. Then all of Karen Carpenter, superstar Karen Carpenter stories, basically that. parts of Poison are that, because the part that you likely forget about, and I usually don't think about with Poison either, is the part about that boy that killed his own stepfather and then flew away.
Yeah.
And that's like treated as this like literally like a news magazine, like an Inside Edition story or something, or like a Nightline or whatever. And then that happens sort of slightly again, and I'm not there, with the stuff with Julianne Moore, the stuff with the Jack Rollins stuff, and then it happened again in May, December a little bit. And
do you
so
think,
it's like,
just to run this back, do you think to some extent that has anything to do with him making commentary out of how queer stories are often told in the public eye, that there are all these tabloids and it's lurid and it's dirty and it's nasty, and it, or also him wanting to scratch below the surface of what those types of stories are and say, well, these stories that are so absurd, let me give you a look. Or
and also, these are all about people's feelings, is what this is about. And that's one of the things I feel like he could have done a little bit of a better job of May, December, is saying, okay, but I get what you're saying, which is that these people have feelings for each other, and we know this is wrong in a legal standpoint, but like questioning that, and I get that, but it's like, okay, but then what's the answer? Like, what do you think about it? Is what I'm wondering.
He would have been somebody who would have came up and been raised obviously in the 70s and the 80s, and you think about like, the real story of Dog Day Afternoon, or these serial
and the explosion
killers
of reality television
that happened in the 70s, and then even in the 80s, like queer serial killers, and how queerness was so often depicted, or even going back a little further, like how dark and dimly lit the world of Velvet Underground was in the 60s. And I do feel like, to some extent, that is something that he's interested in. I think that some of that is him giving commentary to how often those queer stories, the closest they ever came into a lot of areas in American society, filtering into the, quote, mainstream.
Yeah, and another version of this that stands outside of this, obviously, because it's not the same person, is Paul Thomas Anderson's original version of Boogie Nights was that short film, the Dirk Diggler story, and that's very much that.
Mm-hmm.
This sounds random, but I think you're onto something with that, and you kind of explained it far better than I would have, and I wouldn't have thought about it that way, but I think that's the answer. To give an example, I still remember the first time I ever saw 60 Minutes on television was at, we call her Grandmommy's house, who we told the story about Snow Day about, if you want to go back and watch that. It was at her old house when I was a kid, before she moved, that old house. Yeah. And I was sitting there watching it, and it was about, I remember the story was something about a bodybuilder who, had all these health problems, obviously because of what he was doing to himself or whatever. And it was just this very, as a child, it felt very oppressive and frightening. Mm-hmm. And like you're describing it, this very this guy pushed himself to the limit, and this is what happened to him. And it's like
all these things are the basis of true crime,
right?
Today, by
and
the way.
It's and I think, like I said, it's seen as and then kind of wrapping that in, like I said, with the queer element, seems like this deviant, they're like the news magazine's version of deviant behavior, whatever that be, whether it be sexual or physical, whatever, or violence, and seeing all that as together, like I said, that's the feeling I get from that, like you said, putting it in that perspective, open that in my mind, of that feeling I get from when I first watched that 60 Minutes thing, of that feeling of and these pictures up, and that was back in the early 2000s, so it was pictures of him, Polaroids of stuff, and it's very lurid, and it's weird because it's voyeuristic, but it's there's another version of voyeurism which is sitting above it, where it's it's almost like it's all laid out on this table lit by these sickly fluorescent lights, where it's all it's
so
all there for you to see.
You don't want to,
right? But
you shouldn't see, but you kind of want to.
But also, you shouldn't see, but it's too late because it's being investigated, and it's it's like you're the policeman looking at all of it, trying to figure it out, and it doesn't matter what it is. It's there's not even a question of voyeurism. It's you're just gonna do this whether you want to or not, and I don't know. This is all going off topic, but I've noticed that with his movies, that recurrence, and I think you're right about that. Maybe, and I'd be interested. That's if I ever had to ask him one question, it would probably be that, like, what's your interest in news magazine storytelling? Because that's something that pops up, and he might say a version of that.
And
I don't
that
know,
was becoming more in vogue in like the late '70s through the '80s, in part because of how crazy the culture of the '70s was.
Right.
In this depiction of the
that was partially already being kind of documented in Network, where they're talking about the that whatever liberation army that's going to go rob those banks, and they're going to film them doing it or whatever, and that like.
Well, the whole idea
of that
of that era of the '60s moving onwards as sexuality and violence as entertainment. Now you could go back and say, well, what about like what about like film noir of the '40s is kind of that? It's like, yeah, but it's not nearly as explicit as what sex and violence as entertainment became in the '60s moving forward.
Unless you read the James Ellroy books, which proves that in the '50s people were just as effed up as they were in the '70s.
Yeah,
but in mainstream entertainment,
right.
But yeah,
because in that it's talking about pulp magazines.
Yeah,
and it's all that stuff's kind of off to the side of traditional
people
culture.
that have their own printing presses would make, and these sickos that make that stuff. That's literally what LA Confidential's about for the most part.
Yeah,
but yeah, that and also, well, there was something else I was going to say about that, but yeah, I think that's probably the answer. Like I said, that what you came to there is that as a reflection on American views on what is seen as abnormal behavior or whatever that, but is ultimately what he's, I think, saying always is all generated by the same desire. It's whatever that person's willing. It's up to whatever the individual person is, what they're gonna do with it. What are they gonna do with that desire? Are they gonna take it to the fullest limit or what?
Yeah,
One
question I was gonna ask, I don't think we wrote it down. To what extent do you find Brian Slade to be a sympathetic figure in this movie, in this story?
Practically none whatsoever.
What do you think that means then for the movie?
Nothing.
What it's trying to say?
It's weird because I said this at the time we were watching. I said, this is probably the best movie I've ever seen where I literally, the protagonist or the center of the movie literally means nothing. Like they're a blank slate in their own way.
Because even
that is not the case with Citizen Kane.
I was going to say with that, he's contemptible, but you have there's an in. And that you kind of understand who he is and why he makes the decision he is, even when you don't like him.
Yeah, it's like I was looking at that one shot in the movie. That's a great movie. Do you know that?
Yeah.
I was looking at that one shot in the movie. You probably remember it, where Agnes Moorehead's standing at the window looking out, but actually, that's another shot I'm thinking of. There's the shot of them all sitting writing on the paperwork, and it's a telephoto lens where you can see far into the background, and you can see out the window
right.
Charlie playing in the snow by himself.
Yeah. That's one of those famous deep focus shots.
And it's like that shot literally saying he's always going to want to be that person.
Mm-hmm. That's what Rosebud.
Right. Yeah, and that it's all the way far away. It's not. It's like it's outside of the movie in its own way. It's like far away, and so in that way, there's an emotional undercurrent clearly to that from the beginning, because that's like early in the movie.
This movie's emotional undercurrent is currently hung on Christian Bale.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Which I think, again, is an unexpected thing from the outside looking in about your expectations of what a rock movie is.
Right. But I do think it doesn't want us... I don't even think the movie wants us to be sympathetic about Brian Slade.
No, yeah, maybe
but
not.
It does ask the question, what does he want from life?
And there's that scene where Toni Collette walks in on him with another girl, and he's literally snorting cocaine off of her. It's like, is this what you always wanted,
he's like,
basically?
Yeah. And you believe, and I think everybody believes that's true. Even he believes it's true.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it becomes the question: who are you, also? And the answer is nothing. It's literally like, I don't even know what I am, and that's the difference from I'm Not There. Is that Bob Dylan was always questioning, I'm so many people, I'm so many things, whereas he's like, I'm literally nothing, and I don't care to be. Even Kurt Wilde is somebody who it talks about, and this was actually true from the perspective of Lou Reed's life, that he had this electroshock therapy for having this deviant, homosexual behavior, and that he's somebody who wanted to always be something, even in his ridiculousness. Brian Slade, like I said, almost stands more as a representative as this dynamo or catalyst towards all these other people.
Well, that was the thing. I feel like and this is true of Citizen Kane to an extent, but in this movie, it's like the more fleshed out characters feel like all the people that Arthur is interviewing throughout the movie, whether it be his ex-wife. One person we haven't really said anything about is his first manager. That guy. Of course,
who comes out of that 1960s British homosexual, like swinging 60s scene.
Yeah, right.
And he has AIDS at the end in the movie. It shows, or he's basically going to die probably pretty soon. And another very tragic, very interesting character that I thought a lot about.
And then with Kurt Wilde, like.
And then Eddie Izzard, we haven't talked about Eddie Izzard.
Yeah, but all these people on the periphery feel like more fleshed out people than who he is.
Right.
And I don't think that's a problem with the movie. I think it makes the movie more fascinating, actually, as a study of what art means to people, sometimes more than the creator, what it means. And obviously some of those people are indeed creators themselves, but how art and certain movements, how they can, like, they explode like an atom bomb and they affect these people, and then the center itself is nowhere to be found. It's destroyed, or
it's called zero for a reason. I mean,
or moved on in this case to be something that's inauthentic and not representative.
Well, there's that part where it's one of my favorite kind of emotional moments in the movie is where that guy is standing there, his original manager, standing there watching him for the first time, and he's playing some Roxy Music song, I can't remember what it is, and he's just standing there watching him and kind of smiling, and it's like that's version of like what happened in Vinyl, where like Bobby Cannavale goes to that punk show for the first time, and he's like, oh my god, what a rush, or whatever. And not that that's a bad version of that exactly, but like I felt like this was a more authentic version of that, of like actually having an emotionality to it, which was different than that,
You're saying Vinyl didn't emotionally tickle your fancy?
Huh?
You're saying Vinyl didn't emotionally
also this this also represents a changing from the 60s queer culture to the 70s queer culture, and almost even literally with Eddie Izzard, who is himself a queer icon, and saying, both of them saying, oh no, you go over here, it's our time to do this, and then he's kind of like relegated to literally like a sick facility with AIDS years later, and saying like, oh, the 70s queerness is moving on from the 60s queerness, and kind of said his own reflections on that, obviously. Todd Haynes' reflections on that, but
not a big deal. But I was just checking. Eddie Izzard now identifies as a she.
Okay,
so,
I wasn't sure about that.
I know,
but I wasn't sure about that either way. We've said a lot about this movie without me just saying, as I said in the moment of, because we've talked about all that it means, but not said so much about the style we have in the sense of the way it's told non-linearly. This is one of those movies, I said this right after finishing it, it's like, it reminds you why movies. Like, it's just a immediate blast of style, ideas, just everything that movies can be. It's not even mean this is the best movie ever made or anything, but it's like kind of the height of what movies can achieve for a movie that is, I won't even say relatively, like utterly forgotten about, pretty non-talked about movie in most ways.
Even in Haynes' own career, I feel like.
Right.
I mean, because I think Carol, which I think is one of his best movies, represented a sort of like crystallization of legitimacy to some extent.
Well, also
for him.
adapting queer literature,
and having major performers that are in that movie. The movie we're going to talk about next, I'm Not There, I feel like has the Bob Dylan movie, so it's like got that identity about it.
And even Safe is like, oh, just this weird kind of AIDS allegory, or even Far From Heaven is like, oh, it's like a version of Douglas Sirk or whatever, and then that's just there.
And this movie does have fans, but not nearly enough for one thing, and certainly I think it needs to be even better regarded in terms of his own work.
I think if it could,
as somebody who really loves like Carol and even I'm Not There, and certainly Safe, I thought a lot about it. I think this is his best movie in terms of the sum total of what it is and what it's about, and the achievement of meaning and achievement of the performances and the style, and when it came out and what it means in terms of the contextualization of what it's about. I think it just is ultimately his best movie.
Yeah.
There are other movies I might like a little better, maybe, but in terms of just sheer achievement, I think overall, the more I think about it, more I feel like this is the one.
Because it feels like, this is a big studio, kind of a big-ish studio movie, but it still feels like Poison and Safe, like versions of that, where it's like, it still feels like it's kind of underground and weird and different, you know?
Yeah.
We kind of mentioned it earlier, but it just as an example, it's really hard, I think, to depict... This is a random thing, but to depict musical performance on screen that is not a concert film.
Yeah, right.
All
the different things shows in this feel distinct and feel different and feel like they'll have a statement to make in the narrative.
I keep thinking about because I feel like it's kind of the thing that's the emotional climax of the movie, and you mentioned it a little bit earlier, is the Kurt Wild's, Ewan McGregor's version of Gimme Danger by the Stooges. Towards the end of the movie is just and it kind of becomes funny at a point because of him cursing and screaming, but like we had seen Ewan McGregor in some movies before that, like Trainspotting, which he's great in.
Isn't it wild, by the way, that a year after this he's young Obi-Wan Kenobi in episode 1?
But
crazy.
I feel like that, and the whole movie, he's great, but that scene I just keep thinking about. I've watched it a few times since we watched it again, of just like, and also it has to be put on top of this that he's playing basically Iggy Pop.
Yeah.
Iggy Pop, who is Iggy Pop.
Yeah.
Like, you know, crazy, insane, like who knows what he's ever gonna do, like his own institution of being. Literally, and for that scene to be just like so arresting, and to have so many different emotional undercurrents, like that's just such an impressive achievement to make a scene like that. And I know it sounds very specific, but like it's just so randomly out there, like stratospheric, movie moment to me that movie was I already loved throughout again, but was just like, wow, this is something else. So that's ultimately the thing that should be said about the movie among everything else, is just that, you know, that it's just that it is, like I said, the way I said it at the time, it just reminds you of why movies are important and why movies are can be so thrilling, because the movie runs at like 1,000,000 miles an hour the whole time. I mean, it's like it doesn't stop.
And there's no fat whatsoever, which is something Haynes is usually really good at in general. There's not a lot that you watch and you go, this just doesn't need to be here.
Yeah, and even like something that I noticed, and we'll talk about this with I'm Not There also, because there's the opening credits to that remind me of this idea, is there's so many moments in this movie where he and something he actually randomly, a thing I've seen in multiple movies of his, where he just shows shots of people staring at the screen, like almost like it's a tableau, like they've stopped, and it's like we were living our lives, but now we know that you see us and you see the people and the mass, you know. And there's I think it has such a great random ending to the movie, is it just shows people in a bar somewhere,
right? And
then it just pans over and there's a shot of a radio just sitting there playing whatever the last song was, some Roxy Music song. And then it's like it all starts with, the movie starts with alien visitors and ends with just people in a bar, just like like that this music is part of their life, but they've kind of moved on from it, and it's like, oh, that music that plays on the radio, the oldie station every so often, you know, and just like, I think is, like you said, along with the Christian Bale kind of part of the story, really says something, I think, about what fandom is and what.
And again, I wondered
what makes up the whole of a celebrity are its fans, ultimately. And,
and I feel like I wonder to what extent that Arthur character was, again, Haynes trying to situate himself into that world.
Yeah.
I would apologize for getting emotional earlier, but
no,
at the same
I
time,
think
I'm
that,
like, you know what?
That
really spoke to me this time seeing it.
No, that's
and
an
again,
emotional movie,
I think to withhold that till the end, obviously Haynes knows what he's doing in terms of the journey of that character and how that for us is as close as we're ever going to get to that. And we all, you know, like we don't have, we like glam rock fine enough. You maybe even a little more than me, but that's, you know, we don't have that relationship to glam rock, but we all have that relationship to something, whatever that is for you. For us, and so to like, you know, that sort of wish fulfillment of you for a moment being acknowledged in that world and in that tradition is, again, I think what sneaks up on this movie is, for me, is this movie's as much about fandom as it is about musicians, because there are a billion musician movies, and there's plenty of great ones, don't get me wrong.
This
but
is one of the better
that
ones,
being a component to this is what separates it from most, I think, because it gives us a chance to situate ourselves in.
Well, and I won't
whatever
say
that world is for us,
right? And I won't say that world is the what I'm about to say. I'm not saying is my version of that, but that's another thing I was going to say about Todd Haynes earlier, is that I had seen his movies before this and after this. What I'm talking about, but when I was in college, that was when I went through these movies, you know, and I will always remember that time period of, wow, Todd Haynes, and like going through his movies and feeling like, wow, these are just so great and about so many things. And like I'll always remember when I saw these movies for the first time and what that meant to me to see them. Yeah. Like I still remember the day that the trailer for Rise of Skywalker came out. Mm-hmm. I was literally in the middle of watching Safe when that happened. And I even tweeted about it at the time. I said, who cares about that when you're watching Todd Haynes' Safe for the first time? And I was already like, wow, this movie, you know. And like I'll just always remember the things I was doing and what was going on with. So that's like a version of this to where that's another reason why I think his newer output has been a little more of a letdown, naturally, because these original few movies, when I saw them, it hasn't been that long ago, but it was pre-COVID, so everything pre-COVID feels like immediately nostalgic. But that immediately feel lesser than when you're thinking about those movies, I think, you know, naturally, but.
I think what's mind-blowing, too, is one of the earliest movies I saw from him was I'm Not There, and how that movie's every bit as weird as I remember it being. But the joy I felt in his movies being, there's more movies of his that are emotionally accessible to the extent to which, again, that movie's not interested in. We're going to talk about here in a moment. Any other final thoughts on Velvet Goldmine, though? Check it out.
No, and it's a movie that most people, I'm sure, listening to this haven't seen, so I'd recommend highly going to see it. It's great.
Speaking of great, the great Bob Dylan, as depicted in 2007's I'm Not There.
People are always talking about freedom. Freedom to live a certain way. Of course, the more you live a certain way, the less it feels like freedom. Me? I can change during the course of a day. I wake and I'm one person, and when I go to sleep, I know for certain I'm somebody else.
You just want me to say what you want me to say.
Once upon a time you dressed so fine, threw the bumps of dime in your prime. Then you people call, say be
all they want from me is finger point socks. I only got 10 fingers.
I'm kidding you.
It's not about me anymore, it's all about him.
How does it feel?
That's nature's will, and I'm against nature.
How does it feel?
Could have swore you was an older man.
Well, it used to be. Much older.
What's with all this doomsday, hocus pocus?
Yes, chaos, clocks, watermelons, you know, it's everything.
Like a rolling stone.
I think, at least visually, that trailer does a pretty good job of selling what the movie is. You know, it's obviously anytime you talk about this movie and you're talking to it with somebody who's maybe not seen it, you're like, okay, so it's about Bob Dylan.
Jack Rollins, the Troubadour of Conscience. You know, like
it's about Bob Dylan, but
would you describe yourself as a Troubadour of Conscience? That's what I want to know.
On occasion when I'm feeling up to it, but Bob Dylan, of course, played by. How many is it? 5?
6.
6. Okay, 6 different.
Just like there are 6 bullets in a gun, I guess.
Yeah.
You ever think about that? Because I literally haven't until now.
On that note, I'm Not There is a 2007 musical drama film directed by Todd Haynes and co-written by Haynes and Oren Moverman. I know I've heard that name. Oh, yeah, this guy, he's actually wrote and directed some movies. The Messenger, Rampart, which was pretty good. I remember seeing that. That's like Woody Harrelson basically playing that disgraced cop.
You told me about that.
It's a pretty good little movie. An experimental biographical film, I'm Not There, is inspired by the life and music of American singer-songwriter Bob Dylan, with 6 actors depicting different facets of Dylan's public personas. Christian Bale, Cate Blanchett, Marcus Carl Franklin, Richard Gere, Heath Ledger, his final film to be released during his lifetime, and Ben Whishaw. A caption at the start of the film declares it to be, quote, inspired by the music and the many lives of Bob Dylan. This is the only mention of Dylan in the film, apart from the song credits, and his only appearance in it is concert footage from 1966 shown during the film's final moments.
Which feels a little tacked on, like, this is who it's all been about.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
you didn't know.
I know. Yeah.
Real quick, also this tells a story using non-traditional narrative techniques, intercoding the stories of 7 different Dylan-inspired characters. The title of the film is taken from the 1967 Dylan Basement Tapes recording of I'm Not There, a song that has not been officially released until it appeared in the film's soundtrack album. So, yeah. We talked about this last time. This is 2007. This is one of the big film years. And when you say 2007, No Country for Old Men, There Will Be Blood, Michael Clayton, Zodiac, all come to mind among many other great movies.
Yeah. I want to look at a group of them here, but continue.
And
Atonement, Hot Fuzz, let's see.
The Simpsons movie?
Oh, The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. We Own the Night, My Winnipeg, Secret Sunshine, that movie's good. That's a Lee Chang-dong movie. Halloween, the Rob Zombie Halloween. Before the Devil Knows You're Dead. 300.
His last movie.
Yeah, they get Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, which is its own disappointment. But anyway, yeah. So, I mean, I think, everybody has that movie year of their lifetime. It's funny that 1999 is most people's go-to. For me, it's always been 2007, and I think for you as well. That also comes with you especially, but me as well, getting into movies. But I don't know. I feel like that's clearly a better year than 99 also. I mean, 99 is great, but I don't know. It just feels like there's a lot in 2007. And there's even movies that we didn't see, like in the Valley of Allah and some other ones that we still haven't got to, even over the years, that, are great.
This was in the award mix a little bit, mostly around Cate Blanchett's performance, which we can talk about in a little bit. Of course, she plays Bob Dylan as, and that's notable, of course, her being a woman. portraying Dylan. And I feel like that's like, for most, even, you know...
She won
people,
for that, right?
No, she was nominated.
She didn't? Okay.
She was nominated for Best Supporting Actress.
Just quickly, a couple more 2007 films that I haven't seen, but I know you have. I think Juno, Into the Wild, Sunshine.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Trick or Treat. That's another one. American Gangster, Eastern Promises.
Mm-hmm.
310 to Yuma, another Christian Bale film. Gone Baby Gone.
Yep.
The Grindhouse films, obviously, were that year. Live Free or Die Hard.
Spider-Man 3.
Spider-Man 3. Yeah,
I remember the movie.
I left that one out on
not good,
you know,
but it needs to be entered into the record, I believe.
There was, it should be said, another movie that year that is kind of also like this. That movie Control, about Ian Curtis of Joy Division.
Oh, yeah.
So I forgot that was that year. I haven't seen that, but Shooter, Norbit.
Even a movie like Norbit is like, obviously that's not good, but it's like it's in a wholly different film culture, I feel like, than what we're living in now.
We'll end it with two more. I think this is a good little, ending. Is Beowulf. Terrible movie.
Yeah.
And I now pronounce you Chuck and Larry. So, But anyway, so obviously what we're getting at here is 2007 was a great year, and this is in the midst of all that somewhere.
This would, for me, in a hypothetical list, be towards the bottom of a top 10.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of heavy-hitter, unabashedly 5-star movies.
Yeah.
This was a movie that years ago I held in that kind of regard-ish, and I still quite liked, but especially after coming off of Velvet Goldmine.
Yeah.
I was not quite as taken with. However, this movie has so many contexts and footnotes and references that it'll endlessly be fascinating to anyone who's the least bit interested in the life, career, music influence of Bob Dylan, who, of course, is one of the titans of music.
Yeah.
Who is Bob Dylan, Levi?
He is a man he is a musician who makes music and is weird.
So I guess this movie didn't need to happen then, really, is what you're saying?
I mean, well, I wouldn't say that. But
what do you think about, well, let's just start here. How do you even begin to take in what this movie is attempting to do with Dylan's life and career via the lens of Todd Haynes?
Normally I feel like we should start at Bob Dylan, but I'm not going to do that because we're going to be here forever. We're both Bob Dylan fans. You're an even bigger Bob Dylan. I mean, he's your favorite musician ever.
And I want to just say I love him deeply. I'm a little hazy on anything like 1980s onward, not because I don't like it or I don't respect it. That's not why. I'm just not as familiar. Obviously, it's a huge devotee of the 60s and 70s era culture in general.
He was in that place, like 70s era of like... screaming Dylan, like
So I want to I'm actually looking forward one day to going through that stuff more thoroughly. However, my Dylan love very strongly is mostly centered in the 60s, 70s. Let me just say that, and that's kind of where the movie's mostly concerned with is those eras.
It goes as far as the Saved era of Dylan where he went Christian, like that whole thing, and that it doesn't do anything after that.
So anyways, we're fans of Bob Dylan. Obviously our opinions of Dylan are going to come up throughout this discussion inherently, but being a movie about Bob Dylan, and again, I would imagine there's probably Dylan devotees who went into this disappointed naturally, just because they wanted something a lot more straightforward. This is hardly anything close to straightforward. I mean, it's very much one of the most different takes on any public figure. We had, we're going to be jumping around in a lot of ways. I know one of the last things we wrote on the notes here was, can this be replicated? I've thought about it, and we kind of tossed out a name or two. I really don't think it can, just because the specificity of what this is so wrapped up in him. In large part because he was one of the first kind of really big public figures who willingly changed his persona over time. I feel like Elvis is somebody that people can point to and
what I was going to say.
"Oh, he kind of changed over time," but that was
way more one note.
Yeah, and also sometimes outside of Elvis's control. Especially through the 60s, like Dylan had a very tight control over who he was, the perception he had. Now, of course, some of that, naturally, when you open yourself up to other people, you're going to have people respond to your work in a way that you never initially planned, and he played off of that. But, I mean, he had a very strict control over who he is and the different versions of him that came out. And I think that this whole movie is only possible because of his nurturing of that mystique and that persona.
Yeah.
So, yeah. That's because we wrote here, who is Bob Dylan? And how do you adapt and depict Dylan?
Going back to that question.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of tough when you already have somebody who came about in the midst of, I mean, obviously you have Don't Look Back, and who's somebody who already came about in the midst of 1960s celebrity, kind of alongside Andy Warhol and Velvet Underground. That idea of celebrity and being a celebrity through being a musician, and kind of that whole he already was so outsized in his fame that there's kind of no point to depict him in its own way. Like you said, I mean, but that's the thing about Dylan, though, is that he is mysterious, don't get me wrong, but I don't know. As I've grown into listening to him over the years, I don't find his mystique very interesting. I just not, and that's not a criticism. I'm just saying that
maybe I would that's the wrong word. Maybe to correct what you mean. Maybe it's just not as complicated as people make it out to be.
Or maybe that's what it is.
Trajectory
like
of his
anybody
career.
who would write a song like Desolation Row, I'm interested in what is in their mind. But
it's just not maybe as complicated.
No, he's an artist and he's a poet, and that's all it is. I mean, and that's another thing about this movie is that we can both probably agree that one of the worst things about it is the Ben Whishaw section is just like, I don't know what this is. And there's very specific thoughts I have on that I'll say for later. But the whole poet side of Dylan, I think some people overblow as well. But at the same time,
I think it was mostly because at that time, people didn't think of singing and songwriting as a serious art form, and he was someone who started to challenge that idea through his lyrics and through what his songs were about.
Yeah, and so similarly, the difference between him and the Beatles in its own way too is that he kind of, both of them started as one thing and then wanted to become another. People adjusted a lot quicker to the Beatles doing that because they were so big, but it seemed to me that the Beatles started as, we're just this pop group that people are real into, and then they actually started to have more not so much interesting things to say as it was interesting ways to say it, I guess. They were in the camera, in movies, playing with their public persona in an even more obvious, direct way than Dylan was, just because his is a little bit more of a... It was popular, but it was naturally a little more of a cult audience than what the visible hermit.
Had.
I mean,
and that's a good way to put it.
And I mean, he's been, and that everybody's tried to do that since then. I mean, it's very much like, I'm going to say things that are very opaque and make you think about it. I mean, there's a huge ego to that, clearly.
And part of that was he was almost parodying himself and parodying what people thought he was.
Right.
And he was kind of intentionally going into there is... times I get frustrated seeing some of that footage of him going in circles for the sake of going in circles.
Right.
It's not to say anything. It's just to confuse
And as
people.
he got older, he did less of that. And then he just said things that were weird anyway. But without... by revealing, he's just kind of a weird guy.
Have you ever seen his...
I
think it was in 2003, 2004, his 60 Minutes interview that was done. I might actually post some clips of this at the end because it's very fascinating. Of him kind of talking about some of these ideas. And, one of the things, it was in the trailer of the Christian Bale version of him, like, people want finger pointing songs, and I only got 10 fingers, whatever he said. And he was talking about the idea in that 60 Minutes interview of, like, the idea that songs can change the world, and there was a time where he bought into that.
Yeah.
And then he kind of ends in this very opaque way, saying, "Yeah, I've been through all that." And there's like a ... to it of ellipses.
Well, there's even the section.
Yeah, I got over that.
The Kate Blanchett, Jude Quinn sequence kind of says him starting to think that way.
Yeah.
By that point, yeah, I mean, with him, what I mean by all that is it's just not as complicated as people, or as interesting in its complexity as people make it out to be. But what I was saying about Dylan is, and the Beatles, is that they started as like, oh, we're going to do this and then that. Everybody expected him, oh, you're the protest singer guy. And then, oh, well, maybe I just kind of want to write songs now. And people were like, what do you mean? And maybe I want to go electric, and maybe I want to just make music. And that's what was always so interesting, I guess, about Dylan to me, is that he wanted to just be a storyteller and just make great music. And that's why, not that I don't love that protest stuff, but I really love in particular his like bringing it all back home, Highway 61 Revisited is far and away my favorite Dylan album. I've always loved.
It's in my top 3. It would be.
And
my favorite's Blood on the Tracks,
and that'd be one of them too. But and then in that way, later on in the 70s, it felt like he wanted to make it kind of about himself, or just more about my life, and so in that way he saw a clear progression, and it does feel like he is different people, and I felt like he felt that way too, kind of like David Lynch is an example, someone who's an artist who wants to do multiple things.
Yeah.
For him, he kind of always still wanted to be more of, I'm just going to make music, but he had different interests and different things he wanted to do. I feel like that was very clear by the point of 64, 65, where he was like, nah, I'm in 66, where he's like, I want to just make music. I don't always want to protest all the time. Or him saying, why are you looking to me to do this when other people should be doing the same thing, And so in that way, that being said, I think it is genius to choose to do Dylan this way because of the different facets of him there are, especially from a genre perspective, and the folk music pretty much takes itself from him and Joan Baez and what's the guy that was based on that they based Llewyn Davis on?
Dave Van Ronk.
Dave Van Ronk, and the Greenwich Village folk scene, but like also that being country music, blues, Irish and Scottish music, like black music.
Part of it too, and I'm sure some people of that generation, I mean, there's hardly any of them around anymore, obviously, would probably object to this classification. But part of that Greenwich Village beat that turned into that folk scene, like, there was a dose of irony in playing folk music seriously in the late 50s, early 60s, because of rock and roll, what that was in the 50s. That was obviously, like, the new thing. And to, like, no, we're going to go back and we're going to play, like, folk songs and, like, old Woody Guthrie protest songs. That was seen in a kind of ironic lens in, like, the late 50s, early 60s. And they weren't using that term ironically in that exact way that we do now, but that was part of it, and he comes from that tradition, and that's interesting that the young black boy section of the movie, played by Marcus Carl Franklin, is very clearly like he's older. He's older than he's got an old soul, and that but he's still a child. Singing songs about boxcars and whatnot. And there's that scene where he's like visiting that other black family. And the mom of that family, or the wife, kind of says something to him like, "You need to make songs about your time. Like, what you doing talking about like all these older times?" And that was an aspect of Dylan that would mature, and he would do his own version of those folk songs in the world of the 50s, 60s, 70s. But that was, that's one of the most head scratching aspects of the movie is the decision to do that. But as far as that section of the black child, but I do think it does, it scratches that itch or that aspect of Dylan. And it should be said, I don't think really, obviously, this probably goes without saying, I don't think any one of these represents, like, quote, all of Dylan. They're all, like, if you hypothetically cut him open. These are all, and it's not even these many. It'd be even more. Guess what? Yeah. Like it would be with about anybody else, right? Actually, in reality, because another thing about this movie is that it, you know, as you said, it like adds all these layers of complexity and these layers of depth that honestly could be true of a great many people. It's just that Bob Dylan, of course, was a public figure. He was in a very explosive, artistically creative era and time.
He's the most successful, mysterious person, like is what it comes down to the fact where that's why a movie like this is made, is because he's so... I keep using the word weird, and I don't mean that as a pejorative either, but he's just a weird guy. He's just not your average musician in any contemporary or even person or famous person. He says, he talks weird, he thinks kind of weird, like he's just a different person to the point where it, like I said, it begs the question of, oh, there's a lot more to this guy than meets the eye, and not that there isn't. Mm-hmm. And not that we shouldn't be interested in the man who could write songs like that. Yeah. But at the same time, like you said, it's not any different than anybody else. Mm-hmm. I mean, but so yeah, that comes as a symptom of the time period, I think. And what a wicked time period it was, you know. But yeah. But
now let's go to the Todd Haynes angle of all this. Right.
Why is the question? Well, and that's another thing I want to say is that, like Dylan, I think we do Haynes a disservice to always obviously look at his films through that queer cinema lens. We need to think about, okay, he's interested in Bob Dylan, so he wants to do that. So maybe we shouldn't ask the question why. Mm-hmm. But anyway, go on. What do you mean by that?
I was just going to say, you know, if you think about like the music-centric movies Haynes has done, even after this. So if you look at obviously Velvet Goldmine, the Velvet Underground documentary, those the beginning and end of that, like those are more Velvet on both but they feel immediately like, oh, that would be maybe where Haynes's predilections would go. Approaching Bob Dylan is just an inherently more big, mainstream, intimidating thing. Yeah. I mean, he had to know that making a movie about Bob Dylan, doesn't matter how successful it was, how many theaters it played, was going to inherently engender more coverage, more interest, no matter how, again, successful it was. So I think for him it was probably, you know, trying to create something that was less a conventional narrative and more so just this tone poem of trying to reconcile how one person is all of these things, in much the same way any one person is a collection of all sorts of things that are hardly visible to people on the outside.
Which is kind of what Velvet Goldmine was in a certain way. Yeah. All the difference was that it was more interested in the people surrounding the person, so it was the external, and this is more the internal, meeting the external.
And it's obviously, you know, there is... You know, I don't want to make this all about, as you said, Haynes' relationship to queerness, but inherently, like, if you're making the decision to, like, you know, have a woman play Bob Dylan... In
the most visibly obvious Bob Dylan analog, very clearly looks and talks like
and
Bob
I actually
Dylan.
saw an interview with him, I think it was done by the AFI, where he was asked about that, and he said that he was like, and not, this wasn't necessarily the impetus of the whole movie, but with that particular section, he wanted to just like depict how strange Dylan looked visually during that time period, and how for so many of us, he's like encased in black and white in that time period, which of course that's what the movie depicts that section as, in a way that even like a few years before, when you think of like the cover of the Freewheelin' Bob Dylan, or you know, like In Color, and like those first one, and then all of a sudden, like we jump a few years later, and all that black and white footage is so imprinted in our memories, and even people who have not seen some of that themselves kind of have a shorthand of what that is and what that means and what that represents. I mean, even Wildcard, the Dewey Cox story, another great 2007 movie, by the way. I think we left off the list. Actually depicts, Dewey Cox went through his era of this, you know, I think in a pretty funny way. I think it parodies him pretty good. how do you take in like the Cate Blanchett playing Bob Dylan and making him a woman during part of this? Like, what do you?
Well, I'm all right with that. Well, also, it's just because Cate Blanchett's great, so it's whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the first thing. I think it's great as like you said. I mean, you look at Bob Dylan and like he is kind of in that era, does look kind of like an androgynous person. So, but as far as that section goes, I think what works about that in depicting that era of Dylan is that Dylan at that crossroads of his life thinking, who am I? What do I want to do? Who do I want to be? Because it has the whole him going to electric. And this movie, by the way, is heavy-handed in a lot of its imagery because there's that part where they turn and shoot the machine guns at the audience. And I'm like, it's just an electric guitar. It's not a machine gun.
And it stands out especially because Haynes is not that heavy-handed of a filmmaker very often, and so that is a moment that really sticks out.
There's another moment of that later that I wanted to bring up that is that I think is both heavy-handed but also love and think is kind of stupid, but I'm so glad this is in this, is when there's the divorce papers being handed over, and it cuts to Henry Kissinger and Mao, or some other Chinese leaders signing the détente papers, and it's very what? It's so specific.
Some of that too, I think, is also from the Vietnam War, and that whole Heath Ledger section of the movie with Charlotte Gainsbourg, all of that is a depiction of an actor who played the Jack Rollins version of Dylan, which is the Christian Bale version. Heath Ledger is an actor playing him on screen, and the length and the arc of his relationship with this artist played by Charlotte Gainsbourg, and Vietnam being this background to all of that, which of course was something that Dylan was opposed to and spoke about. But
and that's a lot about his marriage. That kind of was more or less, I guess, written into Blood on the Tracks, famously. But anyways,
that's part of that whole anti-Vietnam section and part of that.
So anyway, back to the Jude Quinn section of the movie. I mean, that's clearly kind of, not that section shouldn't exist, but it's kind of what the movie's sold on in a lot of ways. This is the Dylan section. This is the real Bob Dylan, blah, blah, blah. And that's the most famous because of Don't Look Back, and it looks a lot like the D.A. Pennebaker. Obviously it's not like cinema verite like that was, but it looks like that sort of, and so it's the most.
Well, that's clearly the guiding primary source. That's all drawing.
And so, and also him being in London and kind of being in England in general, and thinking, what is Bob Dylan to that, and then having the Beatles there, and so all that's just to say, I think that section actually is really good because it's kind of the high wire act of the whole thing, and it's like, how are we going to actually do this part? Because all the rest can kind of come and go, and it feels like the movie really, that and the Heath Ledger section are really like what the movie's really resting itself on, and the rest kind of comes and goes.
Don't you feel like the Christian Bale section is there primarily for two reasons? One, to serve simply as the inspiration for what the Heath Ledger character does, and two, to show
to be a troubadour of conscience.
The Dylan who recedes and then comes back in the late 70s as this gospel inspired, more of Christian-y Bob Dylan. And I don't know if the Bale section totally works on its own terms as opposed to just serving as this bookends to those ends,
Yeah, I think so.
There's also to me, the most perplexing stuff about the movie is the Richard Gere character stuff.
Do you want to know what I think of why that's there? Because I've wondered about that myself.
But it's just trying to do the Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid,
which he was in. That's so random. But I think part of that is the very, and this is a very Neil Young kind of thing too. But also similarly, as you said earlier, tying to that folk and American, even West music and kind of what that was, but also just this very because it talks a lot about the unions and this and that, and that kind of farmer side to Dylan, and the even though he wasn't one, but and that whole more like, and even John Cougar Mellencamp version of that too.
The
romanticization of like the pastoral life, and kind of I think that's that section of the movie is that, but it's also just a way to be like, oh, remember when he was in Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid? It's like, yeah, so like I mean, beans.
Do you think it's just to like have another like
another
played by Richard Gere aspect?
And there's not as much to that one, and also there's literally cars in it, so I'm not really sure what's
There's
going
also
on there.
Bruce Greenwood, who plays like one of the few figures or characters who reoccurs in the different parts, because he's kind of this oppositional piece to the Jude Quinn section of this journalist who kind of
Mr. Jones, one of the most annoying Bob Dylan songs, by the way.
Is trying to see through that version of Dylan, and then it's kind of challenging.
But from my favorite album of his, so what does that mean?
Yeah. And then he reappears in the Richard Gere sections as kind of a villain character or type. And to that point, like all this told and all this combined, like what is the narrative ends of this movie to you?
There isn't any other than literally examining that. Oh, another thing I was going to say to kind of go back, the John Wesley Harding era of Dylan, I feel like it's trying to adapt that also.
Yeah.
As far as that, the story songs that he wrote, a lot of those, you know, as the Richard Gere stuff. Yeah, as far as that, I don't really think there's much of a narrative other than to just say, let's try to examine Bob Dylan. I mean, it's very academic. Like, I mean, because that's how I would describe the emotionality of the movie. In a lot of ways, feels very much like that, like the Woody Guthrie stuff. Like when the Woody character goes and finds Woody Guthrie dying, and he sits there and cries, and that feels like it's trying to be emotional, but it's a very academic emotionality. It's like trying to explain, oh, it's a little black boy that's crying about the death of Woody Guthrie. Like that's so essayistic and specific. It's like that doesn't connect to me like something like Velvet Goldmine would, you know. Like I understand it on a conceptual level, you know, but it's like, but I don't. But that's what I'm saying. So like, there's that disconnect between the genuine emotionality of that you'd have in a regular narrative and like these bits and pieces of it spread throughout. I feel like, as we've said, the most connecting version of that is the Heath Ledger stuff. I feel like mostly works, and is really good. And Charlotte Gainsbourg, she's really good in anything she's in. She is asked to do so much in the Nymphomaniac movies that it's like I already
Lars von
respect
Trier's
her.
work in general,
But and also she was in Antichrist too. I forgot, but
also in Melancholy.
Oh, is she in that? Okay. Yeah. But so
what does that mean? This movie adds up to? Is it almost like a cinematic mixtape?
That's ultimately what it is, and I think that's why a lot of people would. I mean, it's one of those things like it's just going to confuse a lot of people. But especially this time watching it, it was tougher to get into its wavelength based on having seen Velvet Goldmine, which accomplished everything it wanted to do, but actually about more things. This did feel like it's like him trying to wrestle with just the question of who is this person, and it kind of becomes that. And that's mostly fine because you don't normally get movies like that. It's just in relation to some of his other stuff, it doesn't work quite as well as a whole as it does in bits and pieces, I think. And I mean, it tries to like link these things because like there's this weird try to be this connection between the like
into the Dylanverse,
the like Woody stuff and the Richard Gere stuff, because it keeps showing stuff about the trains and and the guitar and the machine. This machine kills fascist case. And it's like it's trying to do something there, but I don't know what it is. It's like it's not connecting. So like, and I don't even know that he necessarily needs it to either. And then there's the section of Bob Dylan on the motorcycle, which is like nobody in it. It feels very like, oh, remember when he had this motorcycle accident? Like I said, it's all very like essay, this thing, that thing. And it's like, okay, but like...
I feel like another filmmaker might have even used the motorcycle wreck, which occurred in the mid-'60s, as kind of like
the
a
break
portal into these other
And I'm glad he didn't do that, but it feels like, okay, that's kind of there. Why is this here? Like, is that supposed to be the Ben Whishaw stuff? Like, who's that supposed to be? I don't know.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, that's another thing I want to mention is that he has the name Arthur Rimbaud, who is literally one of like Todd Haynes' go-to interests. The writer, who's a big queer literature, Titan, that he adapted a good amount of stuff in Poison from, I think, as far as that one section of it anyway, where they're in the prison.
Yeah.
That stuff, I think, is more of the Rimbaud stuff. It's also important to note that Verlaine, who was like Rimbaud's basically partner of sorts, would inspire the stage name of Tom Verlaine of television. So clearly that like Arthur Rimbaud stuff is like all in that music, interest. Patti Smith, I think, is also very interested in that.
Mm-hmm.
Coincidentally, I'm not very interested in Patti Smith, but whatever. But that section's trying to do the I'm a poet thing, and like all of those are these like very vague platitudes that are very annoying to watch for me. I don't know. There's something about that section that really gets under my skin, makes me kind of aggravated. I don't know what it is, because I actually like Ben Whishaw.
Well, I think too, because even all these other ones, for all their opaqueness, have their own mini narratives in this
and
larger
that's
story.
Like he's doing this deposition to who.
It almost still
and
feels
why.
like a theater monologue.
Right.
Yeah. It's not
and
really.
I don't get that
story there.
And they put some of his stuff out of his book Tarantula in there, but yeah, it's just there's sections there that are just kind of like, okay, I don't get this, but and that's fine. It doesn't really matter. But yeah, it doesn't always work in that way.
Will we agree that our favorite section is the Heath Ledger, Charlotte Gainsbourg stuff, which to me the first time was not really the scenes I really cared for all that much, but I think, Luca Guadagnino, I've actually heard, we haven't talked about this in a while, I don't think, has talked about adapting the album of
Blood on
the Tracks, and after seeing this again, I was like, I bet it would be something like this story like this, that uses all that music, that album in the movie, and almost acts like a visual album.
Right.
But I think this kind of beat it to the punch if that's what he was going to do, and I imagine it'd be a version of that.
Right.
And also just like, not like visually, the way he looks in there looks like the mid-70s Dylan, like in particular with the sunglasses and everything, Heath Ledger section. So, and Heath Ledger, too, I mean, it's almost to the point of being overstated sometimes, but when you watch him in Brokeback Mountain and, of course, in The Dark Knight and in this, he really was like, it's so tragic what happened to him, because he really could have been one of our great actors.
I was driving home earlier thinking about him and in those two movies, and just how good he is.
Too,
no, I haven't seen that yet, I should say.
It's probably
also, Michelle Williams is in this as Coco Rivington, which is a name I keep thinking about.
Yeah.
Whatever that whole character is.
It definitely looks like some 60s ingenue type, basically.
Yeah, ingenue.
Yeah.
Festive mitten. But that I think is the section that wins the movie, and it's partly just because he is that good in it, and it's kind of like, it is partly that, I think, as well.
So we would agree then, the Ledger section's at the top.
Yeah.
Number one. If you had to, we're going to kind of rank these in a roundabout way, which is probably would make Todd Haynes shake his head and say, that wasn't the point, and I get it, but anyways.
Yeah.
Number two for you, Levi.
Mine would probably be the Kate Blanchett, Jude Quinn section. I think that's pretty clearly,
I would agree with that.
Really good. After that would probably be Christian Bale stuff.
We didn't really talk about Julianne Moore in this.
No, she's so back to what we were talking about earlier, the news magazine section of this is this kind of documentary of them going and interviewing people.
She's kind of a Joan Baez
basically
analog,
well, funny enough, it also has that guy who was in Safe and was recently on Succession. I can't remember that guy's name.
I know you're talking about.
And I don't think he's listed.
He's just one of the corporate bozos in Succession.
Yeah, but he's like plays two characters actually. He plays one in that section, and then one in the Billy the Kid stuff. But anyway, so that's probably mine.
I would agree with that.
And then, let's see, as far as with that. And then from there, it's all like kind of just whatever. I'd probably put the Richard Gere stuff fourth, and then probably the Marcus Carl Franklin Woody stuff, and then last is the Ben Whishaw stuff.
I think I would agree with that exact order.
Yeah,
myself.
The Ben Whishaw stuff, I mean, even to defend it slightly, there's just not a whole lot there, so it's kind of just like...
Well, like we said, all of them have a little mini narrative, and that one just is this extemporaneous monologue.
That one was basically a long version of the title card. I'm not there because there was nothing there at all, basically.
I wonder how many critics were like, I'm not there, and there's not much of a movie here either, just like using the title to dunk on it.
But yeah, also, go ahead.
I was going to say, lastly, we were going to kind of talk about the music, the use of Dylan's music in the movie. It seems like it, loosely tries to follow, like, whatever era it's in, that era of Dylan's music. What were your takeaways from how it was utilized throughout the movie?
Of I'm sorry, which section?
Just any of the sections.
Oh, any? Repeat the question then. I'm sorry, I blanked out there for a second.
Loosely speaking, the movie tries to use the music that it's it's
you're
inspired by from Dylan's different eras.
Well, obviously, I was going to ask your opinion on that too, because you're an even more of an expert than me. Now, they had that I'm Not There soundtrack, which had a lot of people actually do
covers,
and these are some big names here. I'm going to go through them. So, Eddie Vedder did one for All Along the Watchtower.
Yeah.
Sonic Youth did one for the I'm Not There song.
Yeah.
Jim James and Calexico did one of Going to Acapulco. I like Calexico. They're good.
Yeah.
Tombstone Blues, which is played in the movie. Richie Havens, who's in the movie, also did that. Bout of a Thin Man, they got Steve Malkmus from Pavement to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Cat Power did a cover of Stuck Inside of Mobile with the Memphis Blues again. John Doe of X, he did one for Pressing On. Yola Tango and Buckwheat Zydeco, did one for Fourth Time Around. Iron and Wine and Calexico did one. Roger McGuinn, who was in the Byrds, he did One More Cup of Coffee. There's that one that Mason Jennings did of Lonesome Death of Hattie McCarroll Carroll that's really good.
Yeah, I like that version a lot.
That band Los Lobos did one. Jeff Tweedy did one of Simple Twist of Fate. Mark Lanigan, who was in that band Screaming Trees, and then he was also in Queens of the Stone Age. He did one, and then Willie Nelson. Oh God, there's even more. Oh Lord. We'll go through this quick. I'm just going to name people here. Tom Verlaine, who I mentioned earlier, the Black Keys, another Yola Tango, Sufjan Stevens, Charlotte Gainsbourg did one, more Calexico, Lee Ronaldo and Steve Malkmus did one together, Jack Johnson, there's and then there was the I'm Not There by Bob Dylan and the band they made. So yeah, that is almost its own other whole
soundtrack,
project. But as far as I actually feel, I'm kind of impressed by this movie's use of Dylan music, because it actually doesn't really do a lot of the stuff you'd think. I wouldn't say it's exactly deep cuts, but it's just more like random stuff.
Right.
Thankfully, there's not like a Rolling Stone isn't in it, or
it's over the credits at the very end, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, but I mean,
not in the movie,
right? But not there's not a moment in the movie that's like that part of it, Now, I was actually watching this quite impressed with, even when it straight up used Dylan songs, it wasn't too obvious, or it was pretty random stuff. It felt like more inspired choices.
Yeah, and again, I like that there's a lot of covers in here, and that spoke to the multiplicity nature of what this project is too, of people inspired by and doing their versions of Dylan songs. I thought that was obviously a good choice.
And that's also with that, as you heard, a lot of random, of the alternative rock people that he likes, like I said, John Doe and Sonic Youth and Pavement and all those, kind of bands that are newer.
Yeah.
Kind of linking that to that also is kind of a metatextual thing, I guess. But I do want to say, I really, going back to Velvet Goldmine briefly, It's very obvious, but I really love the because I love the song anyway. It's one of my favorite songs, Virginia Plain by Roxy Music.
Yeah.
I'll listen to just all the time. Great song. It's like that's proof that there can really be a great like 2 minute song, 2 minute and 30-second song, whatever.
Yeah.
But in that, it's like a very basic, like, oh, living the big life kind of thing. But then it's like randomly, then it's playing over this like, oh, we got this lady to come in and be our like fashion designer or something, and they're walking her through, and that song famously ends with "What's her name, Virginia Plain," and then it just stops, and he's like, oh, what's your name? And then it does that, and it literally stops, and then she's like, Pam, or something. Yeah. It's just like so randomly funny of a way to like put that song in there, and then have that. Like I feel like that. So like I said, there are moments like that where he can be very obvious. I feel like this movie he did it a little too heavy on certain things, not even with music exactly, just like with different stuff. But that he always does random stuff like that. That's always more interesting, I think, than it should be. I'm trying to think, because honestly, a lot of the songs that were used that were original Dylan versions were more random songs that I don't listen to a lot. And like I've heard them, but like I don't remember their names.
There's just so many too.
Right. But when you have songs like Subterranean Homesick Blues, I'm like, I don't know. I don't remember like what these are. But yeah, I think that's one of the better things about the movie is its use of the Dylan music is very particular, not real obvious or like stupid, you know. I mean, like there's the parts of like him playing Times Are Changing of, you know, but you kind of have to use that in the like protest section.
Yeah, right.
And so there's stuff like that where it serves the purpose, but then other times where it's like, oh, okay, this is actually kind of interesting, a different way to do it. Are there any Blood on the Tracks songs in this? I didn't really catch any.
Simple Twist of Fate
was it?
Is one.
Okay, I didn't remember if it was or not. I mean, I know there were some on the list. I'm saying in the movie, I couldn't remember if there was any point where there was.
Yeah, there's so much music, I can't quite remember all the. Well, let me just go to the track listings of Blood on the Tracks real quick. Tangled Up in Blue.
No,
I don't remember that in there. No. Simple Twist of Fate, You're a Big Girl Now, Idiot Wind. That was in there somewhere, wasn't it?
What,
Idiot Wind.
Yeah, it was. I remember now. That was in. I don't remember where that was, but yeah, that was in there somewhere.
You Gotta Make Me Lonesome When You Go, Meet Me in the Morning, Little Rosemary, and Jack of Hearts, and the Jack of Hearts. If You See Her, Say Hello, Shelter from the Storm, and Buckets of Rain.
You know a song that I was listening to that album actually last week at school after we had watched this movie, because I was thinking about it, Blood on Tracks, and there's that You're a Big Girl Now, and that song, there's parts that was like, you know?
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I don't even remember the exact words, but it was very, that him on a crotch rocket, like, you know. But, yeah, I was playing that, actually, when we had that 2-hour delay day.
Yeah, right.
When the kids were coming in, and we were all just kind of looking at each other, and they were like, what is this? You can tell they never, heard it, and they were like, okay. But yeah, all in all, I think it's a good use of music for this, and like I said, the addition of the whole soundtrack album is cool to go along with that. But I feel like I've listened to parts of that before, but maybe not the whole thing. I need to do that at some point.
Do you think the sheer amount of documentary, not only footage, but also documentaries themselves, combined with what Dylan adaptations exist, almost make adapting Dylan moving forward almost moot?
Yeah.
Experience.
Well, and I haven't seen it, but I know there's that. There's the No Direction Home documentary.
That's great.
Which I'd like to see that at some point.
Yeah. That's basically of his life up to the motorcycle crash.
Right. And then there's obviously Rolling Thunder Review, which is great. Yeah. And that was about a part of Dylan's life I was not really aware of at the time.
Yeah.
When I saw it. And because I'm more of that, like up until the band was the band. Right. You know, it's like kind of after that, I'm kind of like, I don't know as much about it. Really up until, like, I haven't heard much of like Planet Waves or like self-portrait, that kind of stuff. I haven't heard. Like, I honestly jump from like John Wesley Harding to Blood on the Tracks usually, and I'm not really as aware
it's funny.
of that
It was
stuff
the first
in the
time I
middle.
heard self-portrait, I'm like, wow, this is really great. And then went and looked. And they were like, oh my God, this sucks. I hate it.
1970, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it was 69, 70, something like that. Yeah, but it was, this sucks. And people hated it. And I was like, oh, okay.
Well, they kind of said that with, a little bit with some of his best stuff there, Bring It All Back Home and Highway 61 Revisited.
Right.
I mean, how could you be mad at a song like Highway 61 Revisited when it literally starts with like a slide whistle, like somebody slipping on something?
Right.
Like,
yeah. I don't know. That's a good question.
Eventual knowledge, those who will be knowledgeable about the Home Alone, our Home Alone show that we have planned, fan fiction, will know all about the Highway 61 Revisited inclusion.
Any last thoughts about I'm Not There?
No, it's good, but it after, I think it's tough to follow Velvet Goldmine. That's just like, wow.
Well, obviously he made movies in between that, but for us, like,
I'm saying like right after.
This.
Yeah. I mean, and like I said, it's just so much content, and you feel like Velvet Goldmine's so much context, but then it just functions as a narrative. I mean, like,
I think most people could probably watch that and still
and go, oh yeah,
I mean, they might be turned off by
1970s rock and roll music. Okay, I get that. Like,
yeah, this is way more specific even than that is.
Yeah.
So, and again, we said several times throughout, we're really big. I was a really massive fan of the Velvet Underground documentary he did. Which,
what's your favorite Bob Dylan impression in this movie? Like, where's the moment where you feel like, oh yeah, they did it? And usually it's the Jude Quinn stuff, I'm sure. But
well, I said it earlier, like that one Christian Bale moment where he's like, "You want me to do all the finger pointing songs? I only got 10 fingers." I thought that was pretty funny. But
I do like the part where they're like, he's like, it's towards the beginning where Jack Rollins is like on the stage and he's doing the whole like sitting things like, like, and I don't know, like, well, what do you know? Like,
let us know when you know.
That's there is some really good Kate Blanchett stuff. I mean, it's that scene that we used last week, but kind of the press conference section. There's a lot of funny stuff in there. Like, I've thought a lot about it. It's like, are you trying to, like, push your own beliefs or something? And she's like, no. Like, very disinterested in the question. Like, no, I don't care. Like, whatever. Because the other ones are pretty their own thing, They don't really have that accent.
Yeah.
The Ben Whishaw stuff is very, like, eye-roll worthy version of Dylan, like that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, we're our own favorite impressionists of Dylan, I must say.
James Austin Johnson, who's pretty great in general, he's got the best. I feel like he's just a great impressionist.
Sending memes about Levon Helm to Buddy Holly's ghost.
Oh, that's on his Instagram. That's private Instagram, not even on what he did on SNL, or not SNL, but Fallon, I think it was. But yeah, hilarious.
Yeah, but sending memes of Levon Helm to Buddy Holly's ghost. That's the most specific thing here. It's like, what one of my favorite Bob Dylan things ever is that he had that like radio show he used to do. I think he kind of still does it or something. He has like a radio show somewhere that he does, and he was talking about Batman on it. I've showed you that before.
Oh, yeah.
He's like, Batman appeared in Detective Comics number 39 or number 27 in 1939 or whatever. And he's like, it says something like, I can never be I always liked Batman. I can never be Superman, but I can always be Batman. Just so random.
Imagine back in the day, like him at some party, people walking around talking, smoking, doing all Lord knows what, and he just sits down like he's watching Batman on TV in the 60s, hearing his audio commentary. What that would have been.
They get the Joker on there now.
I will one day be the Joker man.
Yeah,
maybe that's his attempt to be Batman, is to be the Joker man.
The Jack of Highs or whatever that song is. I don't really like that song, actually. That's not one of my more favorite.
I like it enough, but
it's like way too fast.
Yeah.
Jack of Highs. Jack of Highs. Stop. Like,
well, I know we
anyway.
said this last time, but I want to reread what he said about this movie
it's
because
so like,
it's like
yeah, like
let's see.
like,
all right, so in September 2012, Dylan commented on "I'm Not There" in an interview.
Well, it took him that long too, but we said that last time. But it took him like 5 years to get with it. It's like,
when journalist Mikhail Gilmore asked Dylan whether he liked the film, he responded, "Quote: Yeah, I thought it was all right. Do you think the director was worried that people would understand it or not? I don't think he cared one bit. I just think he wanted to make a good movie. I thought it looked good, and those actors were incredible."
That's one thing. Before we move on, this movie looks amazing.
Yeah,
I know that's like
really great, high quality.
I know
black
that's
and white.
something that like gets lost in the midst of everything.
I think for me, that's still why I rate it as highly as I do, is because not only the visuals, but like all the parts do not all exactly cohere, but just individually, it's like all really well done. You know, I would say,
and they have their own visual palettes to themselves too. I mean, they all look kind of different, and
I really especially like the way the black and white looked in what looks like the factory section, the Andy Warhol-ish section of Jude Quinn. I mean, it looks
where
like
it's like the tarantula on the wall and all that.
Yeah, I really like all that a lot in this.
The Coco Rivington appearance. I think it's crazy. Michelle Williams in this movie, and all we've done is just laugh about her character name.
Yeah, well, she's genuinely such an amazing
That's
actress.
what I'm saying.
She's
like,
just barely in
right,
this. So,
and it's whatever, but it's
kind
like
of falls through the cracks.
Yeah, whatever. I don't know. That's it.
I guess
that's
the
it. Movie.
That's we're here. We're still here. I don't know if you are.
Go home. E.T. phone home. E.T. would. I could always be E.T. Right?
No, him watching E.T. is what I
now that
hear.
would be something. Yeah,
that's got to do
like,
it.
He's like, oh, I like that Quiet Man movie. Or was that not the Quiet Man? What was that movie? Was it the Quiet Man?
Quiet Man? I think.
Yeah.
I think it is. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking of the what's that? What's the book that
Quiet American?
The Quiet American.
Green
okay,
book,
Graham Greene. I was thinking, the Quiet Man. Quiet Man. What's
he's drinking them beers.
Ouch! Like
aliens going ouch. Drinking them beers.
Yeah, drinking that beer, creating them Reese's Pieces for this film.
I wonder how many times like Bob Dylan's met random people and they try to do an impression
and
of
he's just like.
That reminds me of like, to a certain generation of like, this is really random, but like person on Twitter, Bob Dylan is considered like the coolest person ever, and I would kind of be in a category of that. But there's that one image that circulates all the time of just him standing in a convenience store with a cowboy hat on, reading like a baseball magazine or something. He's just like reading it, and it's like the caption always reads something along the lines of like Bob Dylan in an empty convenience store reading a baseball magazine. It doesn't mean anything. It means everything.
Yeah,
it's just like
well, that's another thing I was gonna say. I think on that radio show he talks a lot about baseball or something too. So he's a baseball fan, I guess. I don't know.
I guess he'd be. I don't know if he'd be in the Twins.
Minnesota Twins. He thought she was my twins. All
right.
Anyway,
that does it for this episode of Everlasting Dialogue. We've laughed. We've cried.
My favorite movie is Twins.
We did mediocre Bob Dylan impressions.
I don't think they're mediocre.
I think they're fine.
I think they're all right. But I think they're the best ever.
Now, let's talk about somebody who did an impression of a filmmaker. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Jeff, what have we got next week?
Stay tuned for scenes from our next episode.
C'est d'après le roman d'Alberto Moravia. Il y a Brigitte Bardot et Michel Piccoli. Il y a aussi Jacques Palance et Georgia Moll. Et Fritz Lang. Les prises de vue sont de Raoul Coutard. Georges Delerue a écrit la musique. Et le son a été enregistré par William Sivell. Le montage est d'Agnès Guillemot. Philippe Dussart s'est occupé de la régie avec Carlo Lastricati. c'est un film de Jean-Luc Godard. Il est tourné en scope et tiré en couleur par GTC à Joinville. Il a été produit par Georges de Beauregard et Carlo Ponti pour les sociétés Rome Paris Film, Concordia, Compagnia Cinematographica Champion à Rome. Le cinéma, disait André Bazin, substitue à notre regard un monde qui s'accorde à nos désirs. Le mépris et l'histoire de ce monde.
S'arrêter n'importe où.
Mais qu'est-ce qu'on fera toute la journée? Non, il faut d'abord trouver mon frère. Il lui donnera plein de fric. Et ensuite, on se trouvera un chouette hôtel chic et on ricolera.
Vous voyez, elle pense qu'à rigoler.
À qui tu parles?
Spectateur.
Tu vois, je te l'avais dit. Je le regrette déjà. Tu es fou d'avoir fait ça.
Non, je suis amoureux.
C'est la même chose. Moi, j'ai décidé de ne plus jamais tomber amoureuse. Je trouve ça dégoûtant.
Allez, dis pas ça. Allez, dis pas ça. Il y a 2 minutes, je voyais la mort partout, maintenant c'est le contraire. Regarde. La mer, les vagues, le ciel. Ah, la vie est peut-être triste, mais elle est toujours belle. Tout à coup, je me sens libre. On peut faire ce qu'on veut quand on veut. Regarde. À droite, à gauche, à droite, à
Oh, le petit con, le petit con. Il roule sur une ligne droite et il est forcé de la suivre jusqu'au bout.
Tu vois? Regarde.
Chapitre 8.
Une saison en enfer.
L'amour est à réinventer.
La vraie vie est ailleurs. Des siècles et des siècles s'enfuirent dans le lointain comme des orages.
Je la tins contre moi et je me mis à pleurer.
C'était le premier. C'était le seul rêve.
Now, Jean-Luc Godard, he is all filmmaker. Like somebody said, he is all man in the bedroom. Like,
well, I don't know.
I don't want to know about that.
We were talking about Altman earlier in terms of his body of work in the 70s. I'm going to read you all the titles of
Godard
movies just from the 60s. Just the 60s.
This ain't even, if you actually go to his Wikipedia page, that ain't even every movie that he made.
Is...
through his whole career, even.
Right.
Yeah.
So from 60 to 69, Breathless. That's his first movie, by the way, which everybody talks about. But,
right.
A Woman is a Woman, My Life to Live, The Little Soldier, The Carabiners, Contempt, Band of Outsiders, A Married Woman, Alphaville, Pierre LeFou, Masculine Feminine, Made in USA, 2 or 3 Things I Know About Her, La Chinoise, Weekend, and Joy of Learning. Wow. Slow down. Okay?
Yeah.
Now, obviously, unless you speak French, or the 2 movies that we just played clips of are Contempt from 1963 and Pierre LeFou from 1965. Now, those are the French release dates. I'm not sure exactly what America's release dates were, the extent to which it showed here.
It's probably just on like
now we talked about
Bleecker Street, and that was it.
Yeah, we talked about Godard after his passing, which I think was in 2022. Now it's been.
Because I remember I had known those kids pretty well by then, but the kids I even still have a lot of now. When he died, I showed them some scenes from Weekend. Don't worry, not those scenes, because that movie, daggum, I had to cut around that thing like daggum scissors.
Yeah.
That the scenes of the car jam, the traffic jam stuff. Right. I showed them because I was like, I'll just show you some of that. They were so pissed off.
Oh, good. Yeah, that's many words.
Well, yeah, but like I remember one in particular. He was like, "How is this influential? What is this?" He was like so mad because he kept going on and on and on. I was just laughing like. But I think, to go back to that, with these movies in particular, you've always said this about Godard, and I think it's true. And I'll say even another thing about this, too, is that his movies really do... He is obsessed with, and I think his movies are most evocative by the car crash. Like, what is the car crash? And that idea... And I'm kind of being serious when I'm saying this, and you've said this before. But that idea of the impossibility of technology meeting with humanity in this very direct way.
And sometimes that technology is cinema itself.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
His movies are very meta,
yes.
Especially these early ones, yeah.
I mean, literally that scene you heard from Contempt, which I've said before I love. I think it's great.
It's one of your... That's definitely your favorite.
By far my favorite, yeah. And it literally has the camera point at the camera. And
which you can't hear, obviously, but that's what happens.
But, and then there's Pierre Le Fou, which I saw in college. And I have a lot to say, and I've said that about that movie before, and we'll talk about it then. But
you did like it a little better the second time.
Yes, and I expect to like it even more the next. But that's a movie I think a lot about, though. It doesn't it's gotten to the point where kind of like how I feel about Weekend too, because I really didn't like that when I first saw it. And we'll tell the Wallace Shawn story next week. But I'll keep you in suspense for that. But in the meantime, if you want to find out, just go watch him and Andre Gregory at the Criterion Closet and be like, well, what the hell was any of that? But both those movies, it's like, and having watched so many more of his movies, because that was one of my big COVID projects, was to watch through a lot of his 60s stuff. Right. And I did like quite a few other ones here and there I thought were better, and then there's ones I really still didn't like. But I really like Breathless. But seeing those movies, you just don't get so mad about them anymore. It's kind of just like you look at them and go, yeah, okay, whatever. But you just see and even when it was done from this, like, and we talked about Godard when he died for a long time, but you see even at his most aggravating, it's all from this place of pure passion for something, even if it's in a negative or cynical view. It's always this, he commits everything.
I don't remember the quote. Somebody said it a long time, and people paraphrased it. The line between love and hate is a very thin thing, especially if you hate something. I wouldn't say if you love something you hate it, not that. But if you hate something strong enough, then there's some love or there's some disappointment in that love with that thing, and that was his relationship to cinema. Yeah. Because early on it started off of, of course, we all, I say we all, anyone who's a cinephile, we all know the origin story of the French New Wave, that it was these...
Here's the cinema
these French critics, him and Truffaut, obviously, who...
Jacques Rivette, Claude Chabrol, Eric Romer.
Who, all were they were complaining about what the cinema of quality was in France in, the mid to late 50s, and thinking, why don't we do something more... inspired, and ironically,
because we go back and watch Renoir, and it's like, this stuff's good.
Renoir is amazing. Renoir was an amazing director. Anyway, so
I've only seen Tony, but
I saw Grand Illusion a while back. I think I mentioned that in the last pod. That's as good as everybody says it is. And of course,
Rules of the Game.
What's
the other guy's name? Jean Vigo. His movie.
Yeah, he's great. I don't know if he exactly qualified in some of those.
Right,
but he's great. Anyway, but they're like, well, why don't we make our own movies? And ironically, they looked to Hollywood partially for inspiration. They were obsessed with John Ford, and especially Nicholas Ray, and these directors who were doing things
genre cinema, because you see that with Bondapart and even Alphaville.
And they're like, why don't we take Alphaville? Why don't we take
that's good.
It's good. Why don't we take some of those movies more seriously and so Outsiders Breathless is his version of kind of a gangster movie, and I say that in
it shows Humphrey Bogart in it a lot.
And as Godard's cinema developed, and overall I like Truffaut's cinema overall a little better, and certainly his perspective on things, but nonetheless, as Godard's especially aesthetic became more pronounced and more confident, he became more confrontational at the same time. Now, that's not to say Breathless isn't confrontational in its own way, but it became more and more outwardly political, outwardly meta, outwardly almost like the new Godard movie in the 60s was basically what's the latest thing he's got on his mind? I want to hear what that is and see how that's articulated. And really, I think Americans need to understand that for the American intellectual class, particularly the left in the 60s, Godard was like one of the North Stars, so much so that he was, in many ways, he was representative of Western nihilism in a visual art form. And so when you watch these movies, they're not only like sophisticated or provocative, even when you don't like them. I mean, I kind of hated Weekend when I saw it. I want to see it again, but the first time I saw it, I was like, oh, screw you, screw this. But it's a movie
that is a movie I think a lot about.
I think a lot about, and is politically compelling, and certainly, as you said, and to the consternation of your student, influential. And obviously, we are huge fans of New Hollywood. New Hollywood was this attempt to do the French New Wave and these other new waves all across the world justice, and trying to take some of the things that they did and apply them in an American context. But with these two movies, Contempt is very much kind of a movie about movies and a movie about filmmaking. And Pierre Le Fou is in many ways just kind of this outward dynamite of a political statement, both literally and figuratively. And these are movies very clearly made by a brilliant, troubled genius, and I don't use that word loosely, because even, and we talked about this after his passing, even in his movies you object to, you're compelled by, they're memorable, and they're saying things that even if you don't agree with, you're going to remember.
Yeah, the only movie of his I was ever bored by was Masculine Feminine. I think that movie is such a slog.
That
and
is
a bore.
one that's kind of...
and I know a lot of people are into that one, but no, most of his other stuff, I was always entertained, or at least was intrigued by whatever it had to say. But yeah, and I think these represent a good summation of him at his best, and not necessarily at his worst, but at his most volatile. I feel like Weekend is even more... I feel like Weekend and Pierrot Le Fou are pretty hand-in-hand about the volatility, as far as I'm not sure. I've seen Pierrot Le Fou more, so I remember more about that. As far as what I remember about Weekend, it was very much that. But it's been a long time since I've seen that. But with Contempt, just to kind of preview both these movies, I think what works so much about that to me is the romanticism of the movie. Because as I mentioned, and we'll talk about it more next time after we've seen it again, one of the most compelling images of 60s cinema in general is the ending of that movie, and this is a spoiler about it already before we even talk about it, of Jack Palance and Brigitte Bardot dead in that car crash, and the camera's just panning past it, and the music's the famous music from it, which was used in Casino, as we talked about when we talked about that movie, is playing, and it's just like, even then, he can still at least look at this and say, yeah, this is a tragedy, and yes, this is this, and like, he has this romanticism very clear in that movie, He
very clearly got off in destroying and mutilating beautiful things, because that's also part of Pierre Le Fou. Also, but sorry, go on.
And you're right about that, but there is a sense of loss to that movie. Yeah. And
I'm not necessarily it's a criticism. No, it's something he's interested in, obviously.
Yeah, and so and Jack Palance in that movie is wow.
No, we obviously grew up with Jack Palance as producer, one of the the side villain in Batman.
He is so good in Contempt though too. He's just like wow. Yeah.
It's just kind of funny seeing him pop up in this like very highly acclaimed French.
Well, and he had been in like The Big Knife before this, and Shane, and and all these movies in America. Most notably Shane. I mean, and also Fritz Lang's in the movie. That's what I was going to mention too. Is seeing as that. So that movie is about cinema, but and it reminds me in certain ways of Irma Vep, certain things about that.
Yeah, that's similar. That could have been a...
And that was heavily inspired by Beware of a Holy Whore as well, which we're not really fans of. And what I've seen of Fassbinder I've liked, but I'm
not, but I'm open to seeing more and respect him anyway.
But anyway, in Merchant of Four Seasons, remember that movie? That was something else. But anyway... And then there's Pierrot Le Fou, which I think there's actually a lot more to say about as stylistically, is just on another level. I mean, that was my first Godard. What was yours, Breathless?
Yeah. I think Pierre LeFou's almost the perfect first Godard, though. Honestly, because it's just like, what is this? Like,
and it's not to the extent of Weekend, which is expressly more political of a movie. Is crazy, but a little more talkative. I think it like says a lot at you in a lot of ways, whereas like Pierre LeFou does that, and it just shows a lot of things too. And so, that's a good way to kind of think about editing in a lot of ways too. I think there's a lot in that is important for that. But ultimately that movie's kind of about nothing, sort of. I mean, it's very much a lovers on the run killing people movie. What about other things also in the middle of that. Looks amazing. I mean, Contempt really looks great in a more like conventional sense, and what I mean by that is that for 1963 that movie looks like, holy crap, you can make movies look this good. Like, you know. And then Pierrot Le Fou looks great for a movie that is also very, like, experimental and, like, you know, still using color.
Yes.
In a very direct way and not willing to shoot in sunlight. I know that sounds weird, but for a movie like that, it kind of goes against what it's about in a lot of ways.
Part of that kind of aesthetic perversity.
Right, and so, like, that is very interesting in that way, but we've been wanting to do Godard movies for a while, and we felt like these are two to...
Because I feel like, too, these are two deep in the heart of his 60s-ness.
Right.
And so, you know, there are movies also, frankly, I'm a little rusty on. I've only seen each of them once.
I've seen Contempt once. But,
so I'm very eager to revisit these and kind of reappreciate what they're going for. And what they have to say. I know I might talk about it a little bit next week, but a while back I had seen La Chinoise, and I really thought a lot of that. That was actually one of my favorite ones I've seen.
I haven't seen that one, so yeah.
It's a political documentary.
Let me look at that other list just to
you mean
the rest of that. Yeah, as far as his other movies, because there's some other ones I've seen. Le Petit Soldat I thought was all right. Band Apart I didn't really like very much.
A lot of short films. There's that Ziga Vertov group movies he made.
Vivre sa vie I liked.
Sympathy for the Devil, I saw that. That's kind of almost partially Rolling Stones movie, but
there's a lot about Vietnam too, I think, in it.
Yeah.
I wonder what that was like to make that movie. I've kind of heard stuff about that. I don't remember what it is, but just how weird it was for both parties to make. Because they're like, he's kind of interested in doing that, and they're kind of like, we're just wanting to make
and again,
a movie.
Somebody who's obsessed with and endlessly fascinated with like 60s counterculture in America, obviously, but also around the world. Godard represents this kind of, like I said earlier, this like North Star for a grand many people on a visual level. And his movies always, when they came out during that time, were the cutting edge of whatever was being done. So
and it's kind of like how one of my other favorite, movies, and we'll probably do this movie eventually on here, is Blow Up. How the Yardbirds were in that, and it's kind of this intersection of like, Antonioni with like English culture, and that was his first English language film, but also just
Antonioni's one of those great directors, obviously. This era.
But. La Ventura is one of those movies that just sticks with you, and it's just like, what was that? Like,
I haven't seen as much 60s Bergman. I'd like to see
a couple. I've seen some of those like Shame and some of those in the mid 60s that were really good.
Persona was amazing. That was
like I said about that before, that's probably the best movie I have no clue what's going on in. Like, I don't even care because it's so good, but it's like, but anyway, I digest.
All right, so that does it for this episode of Overlapping Dialogue.
Our Troubadours of Conscience.
This is Kyle.
This is Levi.
Take care. God bless.
I know that, and I accept, you don't see yourself as the voice of that generation. But some of your songs did stop people cold. And they saw them as anthems, and they saw them as protest songs. It had that meaning for them. It was important in their lives. It sparked a movement. I mean, you may not have seen it that way, but that's the way it was for them. How do you reconcile those two things?
Well, my stuff were songs. You know, they weren't sermons. They came out of the folk music realm. I wrote a song about the death of Medgar Evers. And the first line is, a bullet from the back of the bush took Medgar Evers' blood. You know, a finger fired the trigger to his name. But the point I'm trying to make is that it's all in the alliteration of the lines. A bullet from the back of the bush took Medgar Evers' blood. It's true, it's written about somebody. And it's true, it's written about a real thing. But it's also done with a rhythm and a certain type of poetic nuance that I don't know how I derived that. I got all that into a particular song like that.
Thank you very much. So nice. Goodbye.